On April 5th, Samantha Granger went missing in the town of Daggerland. If you're from Ohio, perhaps you've heard of the place. More likely, you haven't. Daggerland is 60-some miles east of Cleveland, and if you blink, you'd miss it. Get on I-90, past Euclid, Menor, and keep on going. It's not on most maps nowadays, and there may be good reason for that. It's not easy finding history on the place. I've looked up different accounts myself with little success. Articles date back over 100 years. I've heard everything from the town being part of an old shipping route that silted up and got abandoned, to farmland that went bankrupt during the Dust Bowl. There's mention of a fire along the coast in 1908, burned through a string of old boathouses and took a handful of men with it. After that, the paper trail thins out. It's the kind of place where every generation seems to bury the last one's secrets a little deeper, until all that's left is fog and rumor. All I know is our story starts with little Samantha Granger. Spring in Ohio was wet, especially along Lake Erie, but the first week of April was uncharacteristically bright. There were no clouds, no rain, and the town seemed a bit cheerier than usual. Winter that year had been especially dreary. If you've lived around snow, you'll understand the difference between the beautiful fluffy white kind and the quarter-inch of ugly sludge that seems to coat everything and gets onto your boots. When April came along, it caught the residents by surprise, especially the children, who had felt locked inside for what seemed like years at that point. That morning, the air was clear and the lake looked calm, unusually calm, like someone had pressed pause on the water itself. Birds were out, flags hung still. It was the kind of morning that made people open their windows just to let the smell of thawed earth drift in. A fresh, clean start. Samantha Granger was 8 years old. Quiet kid. Liked puzzles and purple shoes and collecting smooth stones from the beach. She lived 2 blocks from the shoreline, and when her mother turned around to grab her coffee that morning, Samantha was already gone, coat half zipped, barreling down the sidewalk like the world had finally opened back up. They say she must have gone to the water. The footprints stopped near the edge of the bluff, and her scarf was found snagged in a bramble bush just off the trail. But the beach itself, empty. No body, no drag marks, no sign of a struggle. And that's what makes Samantha different. The others, there were signs, broken glass, torn clothing. But Samantha, she just vanished. Like the lake opened its arms and swallowed her whole. "Anything?" George asked. The bathroom door creaked open. Laura stepped out slowly, still in her robe, eyes downcast. She didn't say a word, just shook her head once. George opened his arms, but she resisted. He reached out anyway, pulled her close, and held her without speaking, one hand resting at the small of her back, the other cradling the back of her head. "It's okay," he said. They'd been trying for over a year. Every month, hope flickered. Every month, it went out. "You're still young," the doctors had said. "It happens when it happens." But nothing was happening. Just silence and the slow ache of time. And let's be honest, 37 wasn't all that young for having kids. "I'm fine," Laura said, pulling away. "I know," George replied. But she didn't hear. She was already halfway down the stairs. For a moment, George stared out the upstairs window and thought. And then the radio interrupted him. It crackled, then hissed. "Sheriff Lost, you there?" Mendez's voice came through, calm but clipped. George blinked, pulled his gaze from the window. He stepped to the dresser, pressed the button on the handheld. "Yeah, go ahead." "We've got a situation down near the water. Little girl, Samantha Granger. Her mom says she hasn't seen her since this morning." "Okay, how long exactly?" "Couple hours. Said she turned around to grab coffee and the kid was just gone. She's worried she ran down to the beach. Apparently the girl loves it there." George was already moving, buttoning his shirt, grabbing his belt off the hook. "I'll be there in 10, he said. The weather held, even down by the lake. Bright sky, soft sun, the kind of early spring day people in Daggerland prayed for after a brutal winter. But as Sheriff George Lost stepped out of the cruiser, he felt it shift slightly. The wind wasn't strong, but at the water's edge it picked up, just enough to carry the smell of brine and damp weeds. He made his way down the familiar dirt path, boats pressing into thawed earth. Mendez stood waiting just past the bluff, near the rocks that overlooked the shoreline. She gave him a small nod. "Where's the mom?" George asked. "Up at the house. Deputies with her. Says Samantha took off a little after 8. Said she always loved the beach right after it rained," Mendez replied. George glanced down at the sand. "You get eyes on her yet?" Mendez motioned toward a narrow drop-off. "Come look." He followed her down to the beach. It was quiet. Not dead quiet, but still. A gull drifted overhead. The lake was calm. "There," Mendez said. She pointed. In the damp sand, you could see them. Small footprints, pressed clearly, headed toward the shoreline. George crouched beside him, following the trail with his eyes. They stopped maybe 6 feet from the edge of the water. No return prints. No sign of panic. Just gone. Something purple caught his eye. Caught in a thorn bush just off the trail, fluttering slightly in the breeze, was a child's scarf. He stared out at the water for a long moment. The sun sparkled off the surface. It looked harmless, even beautiful. But something about the stillness scraped at the back of his mind. "Call in drones, dogs, all of it," he said. Mendez hesitated. "You think she drowned?" "I don't think anything yet." But he did. He just wasn't ready to say it out loud. 2 days later, the town gathered at Holloway Park. No one made announcements. No flyers. Just a quiet understanding that they'd meet at the gazebo by dusk. The air was still mild for April. Low 50s, no rain. The last of the light bleeding out behind the trees. George arrived just after 7. He parked along the edge of the lot and walked the rest of the way in, keeping to himself. People were already there, maybe 30, maybe more, scattered in small clumps, each holding a candle. At the very front, someone had taped up Samantha's school photo. It fluttered slightly in the breeze, the tape on the corners barely holding. A mason jar of violets had been set beneath it. A few stuffed animals. Nothing dramatic, just small, quiet things. Her mother stood near the post, alone, wrapped in a heavy coat, hands at her sides. She didn't speak, didn't cry, just stared at the picture like she was waiting for it to change. A few people began to hum. Not a song George recognized, just a low, uncertain harmony, like they couldn't agree on what comfort sounded like. He held his candle, watched the flame waver slightly with the wind. The crowd didn't move. No one sat. No one spoke. They just stood there in the quiet, ringed by cold and flickering light. Somewhere behind him, A child coughed. One candle went out, then another. George looked up. The wind had shifted.
Sheriff to base, come in. We've got a code 847. Repeat, code 847. Suspect is, extremely suspicious.
George Lost paused in the doorway, coffee in hand, and just watched. 9-year-old Owen Winters sat behind his desk, legs swinging, eyes squinting in serious concentration as he leaned into the radio mic like it was a matter of national security. His backpack was still on, one strap slipping down his shoulder, and Crichton, a thin black German shepherd, was curled up at his feet like a shadow with ears. He followed Owen everywhere. "You know, we don't actually have a code 847, right?" George said. Owen turned, grinning. "Then you should." George sipped his coffee. "And what exactly does it mean?" Owen looked thoughtful. "I don't know, but it's dangerous." Crichton let out a low, lazy huff, thumping his tail once against the floor. George stepped fully into the room, setting his mug down on the edge of the desk. "You break into my station again."
"No, I didn't break in,"
Owen said.
"The door was open."
"I'll have to talk to my staff about that," George replied.
"I left Crichton outside at first, just in case,"
Owen added, like that earned him points.
"But, he gets sad when I get too far."
Crichton stretched his front paws forward and made a noise that sounded like agreement. George pulled the chair over and sat. "Where's your dad?"
"Hardware store," Owen said. "I told him I wanted to come here instead. It's really close, so he said okay."
George gave a small nod. He glanced at the stack of files on the corner of his desk, but didn't reach for him. Owen leaned forward, feet still swinging.
"It's kind of quiet around town."
George looked at him. "Quiet how?"
Owen shrugged. "I don't know, people just act kind of weird. Nobody says anything, but they're looking around a lot."
George raised an eyebrow. "You always this observant?"
Owen thought about it. "Observant?"
Crichton huffed again, ears flicking slightly. "It means you notice things," George said.
Owen grinned. I noticed lots of things, yeah."
"Well, maybe I'll put you on payroll," George began. "But until then, get out of my desk." Owen smiled and slid out of the chair without a word. Crichton followed him, tail swishing low. The front door creaked open a few seconds later. "There you are," David Winters said, stepping in.
I told you to stay close."
Owen pointed a finger at George.
"He let me in."
David gave George a look. "Is that true, Sheriff?" Sheriff George Lost shrugged. David exhaled, shook his head. "You bothering him?" Owen shook his head.
"Well, did you eat yet?"
Another shake.
"All right, go let Crichton out for a minute,"
David began.
"And don't throw anything."
Owen gave a quick nod, grabbed a leash from the wall, and led the dog outside. The door clanged shut behind them. David watched it for a beat, then turned back toward George. His voice dropped. She was in his class, Samantha." George nodded once. "He hasn't said much," David added. "Not about her, not about any of it." "He's young," George said. "Yeah," David began. "Still feels like he knows more than he lets on, though, They stood in silence for a moment. Outside, through the front window, They could see Owen walking the dog and staying close. "You think we'll find her?" David asked. George didn't answer right away, and then finally admitted, "I don't know." David leaned against the edge of the desk, arms crossed. "It feels like the kind of thing we should know." George didn't respond. Outside, Owen jogged a little ahead of Crichton, holding the leash loosely. The dog didn't seem to mind, just stayed at his side, ears up, watching everything. "You ever think," David said after a minute, "that maybe we were better off not knowing what was out there? Like back when we were kids. You just assumed somebody else would handle it." George glanced at him. "We are the someone." "Yeah, that's the problem," David said. The station creaked faintly, one of those sounds old buildings make when they settle or remember. George stared at the window a while longer, watching Owen crouch down to tie his shoe, and Crichton nose at something in the grass. "He doesn't ask about her," David said quietly. "Not directly. But he knows. He knows she's gone." George nodded. "I don't know how to talk to him about it, You'd think after losing Claire I'd be better at this stuff, but..." David paused, cutting himself off. George waited, but nothing else came. Claire had been his friend too. They'd all been a group once. David hadn't said her name in a long time, and it was good to hear it again. She had died, but she wasn't gone. David gave a small smile, the first one since he walked in. The moment held, quiet, heavy, and just before it could fully settle, the radio crackled.
"Sheriff Lost, you copy?"
George stepped forward and picked it up. "Yeah, go ahead."
"It's Mendez,"
came the voice.
"We've got another one. 8-year-old boy, Josh Maddox. Parents said he was riding his bike near the lake at Palmer's Bluff. That was about 40 minutes ago. No sign of him since."
George's grip tightened on the receiver. "Is there a search party yet?"
"Already started. Found the bike tipped over, that's it," Mendez replied.
George set the radio down. David was already on his feet. "You want company?" George looked at him. "You sure?" David gave a quick nod. "Yeah, Owen's grandpa's 2 stores over. I'll flag him on the way out. Have him take the kid home." George didn't argue, and the door shut behind them. Sheriff Lost stepped out into the late afternoon sun, the wind catching the edge of his jacket. David followed close behind, both men walking with purpose toward the cruiser. As George slid into the driver's seat, he keyed the mic on the dashboard. "Mendez, it's Sheriff Lost. We're en route now, ETA 6 minutes.
"Copy that, Sheriff,"
came the reply.
"I've got 2 deputies canvassing the bluff, but no sign of the kid yet."
David buckled his seatbelt. "Josh Maddox, that's one of Owen's classmates." George nodded. "Yeah, I remember the name from the school visits." They pulled out onto the main road, lights flashing but no siren. Daggerland wasn't big enough to need one. Everyone moved over when they saw the cruiser anyway. Palmer's Bluff was just north of the main beach, a rocky outcrop that jutted into the lake like a bent finger. It wasn't far, a 10-minute ride on a normal day, shorter if you pushed the limit. David scanned the side streets as they passed, his fingers drumming against his leg. You think it's the same thing?" he asked. George didn't answer right away. The truth was, he did. Deep down in that part of his gut, that only ever spoke when something was really wrong, but saying it out loud made it too real. "We'll see when we get there," he said instead. As they turned off the main road, the trees thinned and the lake came into view, wide, flat, and still gleaming under the late sun. A few figures moved near the edge of the bluff, one of them raising a hand as they approached. George parked near the old split rail fence and stepped out. Mendez met them halfway, hair tied back, clipboard tucked under one arm. "Hey, parents said he was riding along the trail. They lost sight of him for just a minute," Mendez began. "Deputies found the bike, but no sign of Josh." "All right, where's the bike?" George asked. "Down near the path split. Come on," Mendez replied. They followed her through the brush, boots crunching softly on gravel and leaves. The trail sloped downward, veering toward a low clearing where the path forked. There, laying on its side just off the trail, was a small red bike. No scuffs, no skid marks. Just lying there like the boy had stepped off and wandered into the woods. George crouched beside it, fingers brushing the handlebars. No sign of a struggle. "Well, nothing obvious," Mendez began. "Just this, and his backpack about 10 feet that way." George stood, squinting toward the waterline. The wind was stronger now, not rough, but steady. It carried the faint smell of algae and driftwood, something sour underneath. He turned to David. "All right, let's split up. You take the bluff, I'll check the trail past the bend." David nodded and headed up the slope without a word, moving quick. George lingered. There was something off here, something quiet in the way the birds weren't singing, something about how the bike just sat there. And then he saw it. Near the edge of the clearing, a line of small footprints, half faded, pressed into the wet ground, heading toward the trees. And then nothing. Just the lake. George crouched, scanning the shoreline. The mud near the edge was dark and slick, but no obvious drag marks cut across it. He moved slowly, eyes adjusting to the glare of the late-day sun on the water. "Josh," he called, keeping his voice steady. "It's Sheriff Lost. You out here?" Silence. George followed the line of footprints again. They stopped barely 2 feet from where the reeds began. Something about the way they ended bothered him. No stagger, no shift in weight, no turn back toward the trail. Just gone. He straightened and looked out over the lake. The water was calm, but a faint ripple moved against the wind near the edge. It was subtle, almost easy to miss, like something had disturbed the surface and then slipped under. A branch cracked somewhere in the brush to his right. George turned, hand hovering near his sidearm. "Josh?" A small figure stepped out. Mud streaked the boy's cheeks, and his hair stuck up in clumps. He clutched something against his chest, a worn backpack, zipper half open. "Hey," George said softly. "You okay?" Josh didn't answer. His eyes darted past George, toward the water. Footsteps pounded down the slope. David appeared at George's shoulder, breathing hard. Relief crossed his face when he saw the boy. "Josh, hey kid, your mom's looking all over for you." Josh didn't move. His lips parted slightly, and for a second George thought he might say something. But then the ripple on the lake grew. It started maybe 20 feet out, pushing toward shore. Sunlight caught on something dark just beneath the surface. The movement was smooth, deliberate, not the random slosh of a current. As it came closer, the water shallowed just enough for a shape to break through. The head came first, sleek, black, wet, followed by shoulders that rolled unnaturally as they rose. Long arms ended in claws that scraped at the sand, and the mouth, it was full of very sharp teeth, curled into something like a grin. David spoke first. "What the hell is that?" Josh took a step back. David moved in front of him, one hand out to nudge him farther from the water. George stayed rooted, eyes locked on the thing as it stepped from the shallows. Each claw dug into the damp ground. It didn't rush. It didn't posture. It just kept walking, slow and certain, that grin never leaving its face. Sheriff?" David said. But George didn't answer. His hand was already on his holster, thumb flicking the strap free. The creature stepped closer. The wet slosh of its feet against the sand was louder than it should have been. 2 more slow steps, claws sinking into the mud. Another step. The water line was behind it now. George fired a warning shot, but the thing kept moving. Then another. A puff of mist and black water kicked up from the creature's shoulder, but it didn't even flinch. George fired again, center mass. This time he saw the round hit, a small burst just under its collarbone. The creature staggered, just a fraction, but its grin stayed. Another step. "George," David muttered. Another shot rang out. The round hit dead in the chest, right where a man's heart would be. The creature looked down for a moment, then back up. George took a half step backward, boots crunching in the sand. He'd seen men get shot and keep moving before. Adrenaline, bad drugs, worse luck. But this was different. There was no pain in those eyes, no fear. The thing lifted one long claw and tapped the spot where the bullet had hit. Josh whimpered behind David. "Get him out of here," George said without looking away. David's hand tightened on Josh's shoulder. "And leave you?" "Now, Dave," George said. "Go." The creature took another step. The water behind it lapped quietly at the shore. David grabbed Josh by the arm and moved fast, hauling him toward the trail without another word. The boy stumbled once in the sand, but didn't complain. Within seconds, they were swallowed by the trees, their footsteps fading. George adjusted his stance, bringing the pistol back up. The creature watched them go, then turned its attention fully to him. That grin stayed fixed, water dripping steadily from its chin and the ragged tips of its claws. It took a step closer. George fired once, a clean center mass shot. The round hit with a wet thump, kicking up a spray of brackish fluid. The thing staggered, but only for a heartbeat before straightening again. Another step. George fired again. The bullet punched into its side. No reaction. George backed up 2 steps, keeping his sights locked. His boots found firmer ground near the grass line, and he planted himself there. He wasn't giving it the beach. 20 feet out. 15. The grin widened until it seemed to split its face. It tapped one long claw against the hole in its chest, smearing the black fluid there. and then let out a slow exhale. 10 feet. George's finger tightened on the trigger. The creature smiled. Its claws flexed slightly, dragging lines in the wet sand. It was close now. And then from behind, muffled at first, came voices. Men and women calling through the trees, footsteps crunching on the brush. The unmistakable sound of more than one person moving quick. "Sheriff?" "Mendez." "Over here," George said, eyes still locked on the thing. The creature's gaze shifted, not toward the sound, but back to him, like the rest of the world didn't exist. The voices grew louder. Branches snapped. Boots hit the sand somewhere behind him. George blinked once. He angled his head to call again, and when he turned back, the shoreline was empty. No ripple on the water. No churned mud where it had stood. Just a calm lake and the faint imprint of claws in the sand, already filling with dark water that seeped in from the tide. He held his gun up a second longer, scanning the surface for any break, any shadow. But there was nothing. Mendez was the first down the slope, her boots skidding slightly in the damp sand. She stopped a few feet from him, chest rising and falling. "What happened?" she asked, eyes scanning the lake. George kept his gaze fixed on the water. "It was here." "What was?" Mendez asked. The rest of the deputies were spilling out of the beach now, their flashlights already cutting over the sand and reeds. None of them looked toward the water like they expected to see anything. "I don't see anything," Mendez said, stepping closer. "Was it the kid?" George shook his head. "No, not the kid." She followed his stare out to the lake. "Then what?" George finally looked at her, the weight in his expression making her pause. Mendez glanced back at the calm water, then to the wet claw marks near his feet. She crouched, touching the edge with her fingers. "These weren't here earlier." "No," George began. "They weren't." The wind shifted, colder now, carrying the faint smell of the lake up around them. Somewhere in the trees, someone called that they'd found David and Josh. George stared out at the water. "Let's get everyone off the beach." The meeting hall on Main Street wasn't built for crowds, but by 6 o'clock the following night, every folding chair was taken. A few people stood in the back, arms crossed, murmuring under their breath. The overhead lights gave everything a faint yellow cast, and the smell of coffee from the refreshment table hung in the air. George stood near the front, leaning on the podium like he'd rather be anywhere else. Mendez was off to his left, talking quietly with two deputies. David sat in the second row, Owen at home with his grandfather. "All right," George began. "Thanks for coming on short notice. I know folks have things to do, but this is important." A man in the back raised a hand. "Is this about Samantha?" George's jaw tightened. "Yeah, it's about her, and it's about Josh Maddox." That got the room talking again. A ripple of voices, quick and tense. George waited for it to die down. "I'm gonna be straight with you. 2 kids have gone missing near the lake in the last 3 days. 1 is still missing. 1 was found today, alive. For now, that's all I'm gonna say about the details." A woman in the third row frowned. You mean the lake's not safe? George scanned the room, meeting eyes where he could. I mean this. Effective immediately, I'm asking everyone to stay away from the water. No fishing, no walking the shore, no late-night boating. Keep your kids away from the bluffs and the water line day or night. If you see anything unusual, I don't care if it's a person, an animal, anything, you call my office right away. Do not check it out yourself. The room fell quiet, but the unease was palpable. From tonight on, there's a curfew at 8 p.m. If you have to be out past that, you call my office and we'll send someone to help you. This is just until we've got a better handle on things. An older man in a work coat stood up. George, we've lived here all our lives. You telling us we're not safe in our own town? I'm telling you to use your head, Jim, George began. Until we know what's going on, we need to be safe. No one moved to argue. A few nodded reluctantly. All right, that's all, George said. When the meeting broke, most people filed out quickly. Conversations kept to low murmurs. George stayed at the front, watching them go, until only a handful remained. David, Mendez, and 2 deputies. Mendez stepped closer. You think they'll listen? I don't know, George replied. Mendez pulled a chair closer to the podium and sat, resting her forearms on her knees. All right. What happened out there today? You've been dancing around it since I called you. George walked to the refreshment table, poured himself a coffee that had been sitting too long, and took a slow sip. You wouldn't believe me. Try me, Mendez said. David was leaning against the wall, arms crossed, his expression tight. I saw it too. Saw what? Mendez asked. George finally turned toward him. There was something in the water. It was tall. Had claws, he said. Mendez tilted her head. An animal? No, George began. It was standing upright. I think it was smiling. David's eyes flicked to the floor. George fired. Hit it once right in the chest. Didn't even slow it down. Mendez's mouth worked for a second before any words came out. And you're sure you weren't hallucinating? No, George said. It was there. And it was real. Nobody spoke for a long moment. Mendez rubbed at the bridge of her nose. So what's the plan? I don't know yet. But for now we keep people away from the lake, George said. And we stay ready. David pushed off the wall. If it comes back, I am not waiting for it to make the first move. George met his eyes, and for a moment the sheriff's tired expression hardened into something else. He thought of Josh. He'd taken the little boy home after what happened, and he was safe. But George thought of what might have happened if they'd been just 1 minute later. He shuddered. Outside, the night settled over Daggerland like a heavy blanket. The town hall had emptied out, leaving just the hum of old lights and the distant hush of the lake beyond. George took a breath, feeling the weight of the evening settle on his shoulders. They filed out quietly, leaving George alone in the stillness. For a moment, he just listened to the faint creak of the old building, to the distant lap of water against the shore. He reached for his sheriff's hat from the table, setting it low on his brow, His hand lingered there for a second before he stepped out into the cool night air. The street was empty, the kind of stillness that felt earned after a long day. Porch lights dotted the block, and somewhere far off, a screen door clapped shut. And then it came, a sound drifting from the direction of Lake Erie. Low at first, almost like the wind catching in a hollow log, and then rising into something else. It didn't belong to any bird or animal George had ever heard, and it carried too far across the water to be an accident. He stood there, listening until the sound died out, leaving only the faint lap of water against the shore. He'd told Laura to stay at her mother's in Youngstown, a bit of a drive, but at least it was inland. As for him, he'd be staying. It was his responsibility to watch over the town of Daggerland. George stepped back inside, checked the load in his revolver, and poured himself a fresh cup of coffee. It was going to be a long night. My name's Jack. I'm 34 years old, an archaeologist by trade. And yeah, I know what you're thinking. It's a hell of a job, right? It is. Beats the office cubicles and fluorescent lights I used to rot under. Used to be one of those guys in stiff shirts and blue light glasses, shuffling papers and running in circles, chasing promotions that didn't mean anything. Did that for a long time. About 5 years, actually. Academia is like that. You get stuck. See, the thing about studying ancient history is it's all fascinating until you're stuck inside a gray building talking about it instead of being out there digging it up with your own two hands. That was the reason I got into this in the first place. I wasn't built to sit still. I got good grades, sure, really good ones. Best in my department, actually. I wrote papers on pre-dynasty pottery forms and the ancient period like they were gospel. But the whole time, I just kept thinking about sand, dust, heat, the sting of the desert sun behind my eyes. I wanted to feel history, not just talk about it. So after I got my doctorate, I walked out of Oxford and I didn't look back. That's when I made the leap. Egypt had always called to me. Something about the place never let go once it got into my head. Maybe it was the movies. Brendan Fraser's The Mummy came out when I was still a kid. And man, that thing lit me on fire. I must have watched it 24 times. Something about the danger and the mystery. The tombs hidden for centuries, waiting to be disturbed. It never felt scary to me exactly. It felt right. Like I was supposed to be there. So I saved up, sold some stuff, packed a backpack, and moved to Cairo. Didn't even tell half the people in my life. There wasn't anything left back home I couldn't live without. So I started out small, joining local digs as a volunteer. Turns out it's easy to find work if you know what you're doing and you're willing to sweat. Egypt's full of ruins and relics, and every university or museum wants a piece of it. I didn't mind being the guy holding the brush at first. Being in the field was enough. But it didn't take long before I started leading my own teams, taking over small sites, collecting samples for research institutions. You earn your stripes one pottery shard at a time. Eventually, I started guiding tours too. Part-time gig, mostly during the summer when the families fled in with their cameras and big hats, looking to touch history with their own hands. It's easy money. Honestly, it's fun. You get to see the wonder in their faces when they look up at the pyramids for the first time. And I get to pretend I'm some kind of desert cowboy, walking them through the sands like I own the place. I throw in a little mythology, maybe a curse or two. Gets a laugh, gets a tip. Kids especially love my dog, Jet. Jet's a mutt, scrappy little black thing that looks like he was stitched together from spare parts. Bit my ankle the first time I met him. Literally ran up and clamped down on my leg like I owed him money. I don't know what made me take him in, but he's been mine ever since. Goes with me on every dig, every tour. Doesn't bark much, just sticks close and watches people. The kids call him Anubis. He's got a collar with a scarab beetle charm I picked up from a market in Giza. Nothing expensive, just a copper trinket. But it shines in the sun, and it makes him look like he belongs in a museum. Locals like him. Even the old men in the coffee shops nod at him like he's some kind of guardian. Superstitious bunch, but who am I to argue? If Jet wants to keep the spirits away, he is more than welcome to it. My days now usually mix of digging and walking people around in the heat. It's not glamorous work. You're sweating before breakfast, your back aches, and the sand gets everywhere. I mean everywhere. But it's good work. Honest work. You get up before the sun, you stretch out under a tarp while you sip hot tea, and then you get your hands dirty. You dig, you brush, you listen for the sound of stone under your tools. And sometimes, just sometimes, you find something incredible. That's the part that makes it all worth it. You hit something solid, and you don't know what it is yet. Your heart starts pounding, your fingers tremble just a little. You start brushing faster, careful but eager, and then there it is. A piece of pottery, an old coin, a fragment of bone, something no one's seen in 1,000 years. Something that belonged to a person who lived and died before your whole country was even an idea. It's humbling. Makes you feel like a speck in the middle of something huge. And if you're lucky, you get to preserve it, document it, pass it on. That's the part I love the most. I'm not a spiritual guy, I'm not really. But there's something about preserving history that feels important. Bigger than you. You're not just finding something. You're saving it. Making sure it stays safe for people who haven't even been born yet. I like that. Of course, not all of it's fun. I have seen some things out here I don't have a name for. Egypt's old. I mean old. I don't think most people really understand that. This place has layers, like 100 civilizations stacked on top of each other, buried under the same sun. You dig in one spot, and you find a Roman floor. A foot deeper, you find a new kingdom burial site. Below that, you might find something even older. And the people here, they know. I'm telling you, they know things. Things they don't say out loud. They talk about old tombs like they're alive. They give names to the wind. They leave offerings at the wrong doors. I've learned not to ask too many questions. But I will tell you this. If you sit with the old-timers long enough, guys who've been doing this since before I was born, they'll talk. Especially if there's a little rum in the bottle. They'll lean in real close, eyes squinting under the weight of the desert sun and the years, and they'll start to tell you stories. Some of them are funny. Some are just legends. But a few of them are different. Anyway, I've got stories. More than a few. things I've seen, things I can't explain. So pull up a chair, pour yourself a drink. It's a cool night in Cairo and we're just getting started. My name's Jack, and I work in the ancient pyramids of Egypt. These are my stories. Let me tell you how I met Jet. Not the cute version I sometimes tell the tourist. The real version. The one I don't talk about much. It started in Cairo. I just started leading small digs on my own. Nothing big, just a few sites cleared by the ministry. Dry patches of land a few kilometers from the popular tombs, places the big universities had no time for. I liked it that way. Fewer rules, fewer people breathing down my neck. One afternoon, I stopped by a busy market. I wasn't shopping for anything in particular, just wandering through the alleys, picking through old crates of second-hand tools and brass trinkets. That's when I first saw him. Jet. He was small, scrawny little black dog, with patchy fur and ears too big for his head. He was chewing on the corner of a worn-out rug by a spice stand, growling like it insulted his mother. I walked past him. Didn't think much of it. But the little guy followed me. I stopped near a fruit cart, and bam, he bit my ankle. Not hard. He didn't have real teeth yet. Just little puppy gums and a few needle-point baby fangs. But it surprised the hell out of me. I turned around, and there he was, looking up at me like he'd won something. Like I owed him now. I tried to shake it off, but he kept following me. Right through the market. Right to the truck. I didn't take him with me that day. I didn't even pet him. I just gave him a look and said, "Don't get yourself killed, little guy." I thought that'd be the end of it. But like I said, Jet had his own ideas. A week later, I was out at a dig site in the desert. Nothing impressive. Just a low ridge of rock and some old maps that suggested a minor burial shaft might be nearby. It was hot. My team had taken a break, back under the tents drinking warm soda and complaining about the flies. I should have been there with them. But I wasn't. Instead, I was climbing into a shaft we'd roped off earlier. We hadn't cleared it yet. Protocol said to wait, send down the sensor equipment, run a stability check. But I wanted a look. Just a quick one. The shaft was narrow, barely shoulder width, and steep. Dust slipped under my boots. My hand clung to the rope like it was the only thing keeping me on the planet. About 10 feet down, I found a ledge and eased onto it, shining my headlamp into the dark. The walls were cut stone, tight and rough. Looked like a worker's tunnel. No inscriptions, no paint, just plain limestone. I took one step forward, and that's when the floor gave out. My left foot sank straight through, and my body dropped like a sack of bricks. I fell maybe 6 or 7 feet, landed hard. My ankle twisted under me, like a rope pulled the wrong way. Pain shot up my leg, hot and sharp. I tried to stand and couldn't. The flashlight clattered beside me, still on, still spinning its weak beam around the pit. And then I heard it. A dry, skittering sound. The beam of light caught movement. Dozens of black shapes curling out of cracks in the stone. Scorpions. Thick-bodied, shiny things with claws. They were slow at first. Then one hissed, and the rest came alive. I tried not to move. And then, a sound from above. A bark. Jet? He was up there. I don't know how he got out to the site. Maybe he'd followed the scent of the truck. Maybe he'd been trailing me for days, but there he was. And then He jumped. I saw him fall through the air like a rock in a storm, legs flailing, ears pinned back. He hit the pit with a yelp and landed right beside me. Then, before I could even yell, he was on them. Now, Jet was a puppy. He wasn't even a proper dog yet. But he moved like a wild thing. He tore through those scorpions with teeth and claws and wild snarls, knocking them away from me. Biting, shaking, spinning in the dust. I tried to help. Used the broken flashlight to swat at a few that got too close. Somewhere above, I heard shouting. Someone must have heard the barking. Ropes were being lowered. A teammate, Adam, I think, dropped into the pit and started dragging us out. I was half limping, half carried. Jet was still growling, his fur matted and speckled with cuts. We got pulled out of the dark. The light hit us, and I remember squinting at the sun like it was the first time I'd seen it. Then, just before they got us to the tent, I looked back into the shaft one more time, and I saw something. Down there, in the far end of the tunnel, beyond where the light could really reach, I saw something watching. 2 red dots that blinked once before continuing to stare at us. I didn't say anything at the time, but I've never forgotten that. We were rushed to medical after that. I got x-rays, a proper wrap of my ankle. It was just a sprain, but they made me stay off it for a few days. I got the usual lecture. Don't go down shafts alone, don't break protocol, don't be an idiot. All fair. But I kept looking at Jet. He was curled up in the corner of the tent, bandaged and muddy, but breathing. His eyes were half closed. He looked like a coyote pup, wild and half broken, but proud, like he knew what he'd done. I asked the medic how much it cost to get him all the usual stuff, shots, checkups, whatever dogs needed out here. The guy looked at me like I was crazy. "He's not even yours," he said. "He is now," I told him. That night, I went back into Cairo, limped through the same market, bought a leather collar from an old woman who didn't speak much English. It had a scarab charm on the front, worn bronze with a little crack down the center. I slipped it around Jet's neck when I got back to the tent, and he has never left my side since. Now, not every story is nice. Some of them crawl back into your thoughts when you're lying awake at night, staring at the roof of your tent, wondering what exactly you saw and why it still doesn't make sense. This one's like that. I'd been in Egypt a couple of years by then. Long enough to speak some of the language, long enough to stop calling myself a tourist. I had sand in my boots, paperwork in my truck, and scars on both hands from broken pottery and old tools. I knew the job, but I didn't know everything. I was addicted to strange tales, the old kind, legends. You can always find one if you knew where to look, especially after dark. The men in the bars told them like spooky stories, hands waving in the smoke, half of them laughing, half of them dead serious. The market vendors would whisper them while selling you dates or trinkets. Everyone had a cousin or a cousin's friend who saw something. I collected them like trading cards, but I didn't believe any of them. Not really. Not until the day I got sick. I picked up lunch at a roadside stall on the south end of town. I don't even remember what it was. Some kind of spiced meat wrapped in flatbread. Tasted fine at the time. I even tipped the guy. But 2 hours later, I was outside the site perimeter, hunched over in the sand, dry heaving until my ribs hurt. I thought I was dying. My throat was dry, my skin burning under the sun. I remember trying to get up and failing, just folded back down on my hands and knees, sweating like a pig. Then I heard footsteps behind me. A voice. "Doris the Belly, you're not dying." I looked up, and there he was, this old guy with a gold tooth and a head wrap too clean for the weather. He had a crooked walking stick and one thick eyebrow that looked like it could bench press me. He squatted down beside me like it was nothing. I didn't answer him, just coughed into the sand. He waited a minute. Then he pulled out a thermos and poured me a cup of mint tea, held it out without saying anything. I took it. The man's name was Malik. We sat there until my stomach stopped trying to kill me. I kept sipping the tea, and he kept cracking jokes. Dumb ones. Stuff about how everyone breaks the first week, and this is why real Egyptians eat dirt before bread. He laughed at all his own jokes. Jet curled up near my boots and slept. I don't know why, but I liked Malik right away. There was something easy about him, like he'd already survived everything worth fearing. A few days later, we were back out at a dig. The ministry had opened a sealed chamber next to one of the lesser pyramids, and I needed someone local to help me move debris and watch the site. I asked Malik if he wanted the job. He said he was free, and that was that. We entered the chamber in the morning. It was cool inside, the kind of cool that only happens when sunlight hasn't touched stone in centuries. The air smelled like dried leaves and old cloth. I had my flashlight. Malik had his thermos. At first, it was empty, just cracked stone and dust. But as we cleared the center of the room, we found bones arranged in a weird pattern, laid out in a circle around a large figure to be exact. The bones weren't all human. Some were animal, long and bent, shaped like they came from creatures that didn't live in this part of the world. Hyena, maybe, or lion. Hard to say. But in the center, there was a skeleton with a lion's skull resting on its neck like a helmet. The teeth were too clean, too white. Malik muttered something under his breath. A prayer. I don't know which one. And then the ground started shaking. It was sudden. No warning. Just a deep rumble that knocked my knees out from under me. Jet barked like he lost his mind, pacing in a tight circle behind us. It felt like a sudden earthquake. I dropped to the ground and covered my head. My flashlight rolled away. Stone dust rained down from the ceiling. Malik crawled over to the bones with one hand. And then, right there in the middle of the chaos, he poured his tea right onto the lion's skull. The moment the liquid hit the bone, something changed. The shaking stopped. The skull cracked in half with a dry sound. The ground went still again. Silence. Malik sat back on his heels and wiped his forehead. I stared at him, then at the broken skull, then back at him. You want to tell me what just happened? I asked. Booby trap. Old one, he said. Like it was obvious? Okay, that's not how booby traps work, man. That's not how any of it works, I said, wiping my brow before checking on my dog. He shrugged. Legend says if you enter a holy chamber without permission, you'll meet a violent end. Only way to avoid it is to have tea with the king. I blinked at him. Tea with the king. So, the tea... He pointed at the bones. That was the king. I whistled. Hell of a tradition. We sat in the chamber for a while longer. I started documenting the layout, measuring the bone lengths, taking photos. My hands were steady again, but my head wasn't. I kept looking at that broken skull, the way it cracked clean down the middle. Jet refused to come near it. Later, I filed a report, gave the officials the cleaned up version, told them about the bones, left out the earthquake and the tea. I don't think they would have believed me anyway. But that night, I went back into town and started asking questions. Real questions. Because that was the moment I realized the stories weren't just stories. Not here. Not in Egypt. They were warnings. Well, by now, I work digs. Real work. Sweat, sand, research. But like I said before, I also run tours. And I love it. I get to walk tourists through ancient tombs and talk about mummies, pharaohs, curses, all the good stuff. The kids are the best part. They look at me like I'm Brendan Fraser in The Mummy, or Indiana Jones with a sunburn. They ask a million questions, and some of them actually listen when I answer. It's a break from the serious work. Makes the long hours hunched over stone worth it. Now, most days go fine. Some sunburns, some laughs, some selfies. People go home happy. But not this one. I remember the heat that morning. Sharp and dry, not the humid kind. We were doing a tour. Small group, maybe 15 people. Some older couples, 2 teachers from Boston, and one family with a 10-year-old kid named Milo. Milo was the type who didn't stop moving. You know the kind. Fidgety. Had a little adventure hat on, like he came out of a cereal box. Smart, too. Asked about the symbols on the wall before we even reached the entrance. I liked him. The tour started like usual. I walked him through the outer halls, explained the burial customs, pointed out the ancient graffiti scratched into the stone by workers a few thousand years ago. Everyone was hot and sweating, but smiling. We were halfway into the temple complex when I started doing a head count. That's a habit I picked up early. Dig sites are dangerous, even the ones made safe for tourists. One wrong turn, and you're alone in a maze. I counted once, twice, and Milo was gone. I didn't panic. Not yet. Kids wander off. He probably saw a cat or a weird bug. I called his name. No answer. I asked the parents if he'd said anything. They looked pale, like they knew their kid was the type to do something very stupid. And that's when I felt the fur brush past my leg. Jet? He was already stiff in the ground, tail still, eyes locked. He let out a soft bark and took off down a narrow hall, one we hadn't walked the group through. I followed. The hallway dipped down, away from the cool parts of the temple, and into something older. The walls here weren't cleaned up for tourists. The paintings were chipped. There were spider webs in the corners. At the end of the hall, I saw light. And Milo. He was standing inside a small chamber, barely wider than my bedroom back in Cairo. His little hand was wrapped around a thin wire. One of the old trip systems that thieves used to trigger back in the day. But this one wasn't fake. It worked. The sarcophagus in the center of the room slid open with a dry scrape. The lid cracked, and a long wrapped figure began to rise out of it. I didn't think. I didn't blink. I shouted the kid's name, and he turned around, frozen. The mummy lifted one bandaged leg over the edge of the coffin, slow but steady, like it had all the time in the world. Its head tilted toward the boy. You could still see the sockets where the eyes used to be. "Jet. Guard," I said. Jet lunged between Milo and the coffin, teeth bared, growling low. I was already digging through my backpack. I pulled out my bug spray, standard DEET stuff for the desert bugs. Then I grabbed my lighter, flicked it. A thin stream of fire caught the mummy full in the chest. It jerked. I didn't wait to see what happened next. I ran in, scooped Milo into my arms, and backed out of that room as fast as I could, Jet on our heels. I didn't stop until we were back in the main hall, out in the light, surrounded by confused tourists and one furious set of parents. I handed Milo over, told everyone we were ending the tour early due to unexpected sight damage. I filed the paperwork, kept it dry and clean. A few hours later, a cleanup team arrived. But this wasn't normal cleanup. It wasn't just museum-type guys. This time, there were men in dark leather jackets. Strange, since we were in the desert under the hot sun. They moved in a group, didn't ask me any questions, didn't answer mine. One of them had a case of equipment I didn't recognize. Another had a gun. When I asked one of the ministry reps who they were, he just said, "Monster hunters from the Institute." No other explanation, no business card. I didn't push it. I let them do their thing. I stood outside with Jet, drinking from my canteen, watching the sun dip behind the ridge. That's when one of the local workers came over. Older man, heavy lines on his face. He'd been around for a long time. Helped me on 2 sites before. "You saw it," he said. Not a question. I nodded. "The dead ain't being disturbed. Sleep is all they have left," he said. After that day, I changed how I did tours. I didn't treat it like a sideshow anymore. I still told stories, still made jokes, but I didn't let the kids wander, not even for a second. I counted heads constantly, before the tour, during every stop, and again at the end. I even made the parents count with me. And Jet? Well, he changed too. He stuck closer to the kids after that, didn't run ahead like he used to. If a kid started drifting toward a hallway, Jet was there before I even saw it. He'd herd them back like a little 4-legged guardian, nudging them gently with his nose, or plopping down in front of them like a furry wall. The kids loved him for it. Started feeding him jerky behind their parents' backs. One girl brought him a pack of dried liver snacks shaped like tiny camels. He didn't even chew them, just gulped him down and kept patrolling. I still lead tours, still love it, but I don't take chances anymore. This next story is one of the strangest things that's ever happened to me, but it also happens to be the story of how I met my wife, Charlotte. Back then, I was still early in my fieldwork. I had some digs under my belt, a few papers published, but I wasn't the polished guy you see on tours now. My Arabic was rusty. I could order food, ask for the toilet, and maybe argue over the price of bottled water, but that was about it. Charlotte joined one of my dig teams as a translator. The ministry had loaned her out to us to read some inscriptions from a side chamber we'd uncovered just west of the dig site. She wasn't loud, didn't smile much, wore a wide hat and a permanent frown like the sun itself had offended her. I remember the first thing she said to me. "You're brushing the wrong layer." I looked up, confused. I've been brushing layers for years. "And that's probably why it's all wrong," she said. And that annoyed me. But she was right. I'd been going too deep, scraping past the pottery level and into the compact fill layer. Could have ruined the whole record if she hadn't caught it. So I grumbled and fixed it. She didn't say anything else after that, just kept working. As the days passed, we started talking more. I'd ask her about glyphs on the wall, or she'd correct my numbers when I miscounted an artifact bag. Her Arabic was smooth, effortless. Mine was the broken, clumsy kind you get from half-learning phrases on construction sites. She never laughed at me for it, though. Just corrected me and kept going. There was one day in particular that changed everything. We'd found something strange, an alabaster jar sealed with wax and pressed into a small hollow in the wall. No decorations, no markings on the outside. Looked smooth and pale, like a giant egg. Charlotte stepped forward, brushing the dust off the rim with her fingers. "There's writing underneath it," she said. She tilted the jar gently, just enough to read the inscription carved into the base. She spoke, carefully translating. "It says, 'The breath of the coil shall remain sealed. Break, and it shall strike.'" I looked at her. "You think that means gas?" She shrugged. "Could be. Could also be religious poetry. Everything's dramatic and old Egyptian." I was already reaching for my gloves. "I wouldn't," she started. Too late. I cracked the wax seal with my trowel and gently pulled the lid off. That's when the cobra came out. It didn't slither. It launched, coiled up and struck like it'd been waiting 1,000 years just to bite someone stupid enough to open that jar. Its body wrapped around my forearm in one smooth motion. Black scales, thick and cold, coiled tight around my skin. I stayed completely still and didn't panic. Jet barked once, sharply, and Charlotte was already moving. She didn't go for the snake. She went for the jar. In one quick movement, she grabbed a nearby trowel and stabbed it into the side of the alabaster. Not hard, just deep enough to shatter it. The moment the jar cracked, something changed. The snake didn't bite or try to strike again. Its muscles went soft. Its head dropped. The body fell off my arm like dead weight. I looked down, and it was already starting to shrivel, like a dried-out branch in the sun. The whole thing took maybe 10 seconds. I looked at Charlotte. She was still holding the trowel and breathing hard. Calm, though. Eyes sharp as ever. "You okay?" Yeah, just bruised," I said, staring down at my arm. She stepped closer and pointed at the wall behind the jar. "This chamber wasn't just a burial spot. It was a guardian vault. These snakes weren't pets. They were protectors, meant to strike anyone who disturbed the seal." I rubbed my arm. "So it wasn't poetry?" She smiled just a little. "Nope." There was a long pause. The team was still watching us from the edge of the chamber. Nobody moved. Jet sniffed the dead snake and sneezed. I turned to her. So, dinner? She raised an eyebrow.
That's your move after almost dying?
Well, I figured I should ask before something else tries to kill me, I replied. She looked at me for a second, then nodded.
Okay, but you don't get to open anything else without asking me.
Deal, I replied. We got married not long after that. I was never one for waiting. Neither was she. One day we were brushing sand off broken pottery, and the next we were signing papers in Cairo and drinking warm champagne out of a thermos. Jet was there too, of course. He wore a little scarf for the occasion. After that, the two of them became my constants. Wherever I went, they went. Charlotte, Jet, and me. One strange little team. We kept digging, kept finding things. Egypt had more stories to tell. Well, I'm still going out there in case you're wondering. Still brushing bones, still leading wide-eyed tourists through narrow tombs, still squinting at broken bits of pottery, trying to make sense of them. Jet's a little older now, grayer around the muzzle, but he still runs faster than most of the kids on tours. Charlotte works with me when she's not off consulting for some museum or translating weird inscriptions nobody else can read. And I am still careful about opening things. We've got a little house near the edge of Cairo. Nothing fancy, but it's ours. Cool tile floors, a lemon tree in the yard, and shelves full of artifacts we probably weren't supposed to keep. It's the kind of place you want to come home to after a long day with the sun beating down on your neck. I figure I'll be doing this job, for the rest of my life, if I can help it. Strange things still happen in Egypt. Always have. The heat plays tricks on your eyes, sure, but some of them aren't tricks. Some of it's real. You just have to stop and look. You have to listen. The stories are still there, buried under rock and dust, waiting. Anyway, I have talked your ear off long enough. Wherever you're headed next, whether it's back home or somewhere stranger, I wish you safe travels. And if you ever find yourself wandering the edges of the pyramids again, look for the guy with the sun hat and the little dog. My name's Abel. I'm a vampire hunter. It's not a job you apply for. No diploma, no orientation videos. It's something you're either born into or you die figuring out. Me, I was born into it. Born and raised in rural Kansas, not near any city people think of when they picture the state. Just fields and fence posts, dirt roads, a few houses spread out like dots on an old map. One diner, 2 churches, 3 families that stayed put for 4 generations. Ours was one of them. My folks were honest about why they had me. It wasn't love or planning or a miracle. They had me because the line needed to keep going. The way other families hand down farmland or debt, mine handed down sharpened stakes and books with handwritten notes in the margins. They told me when I was 5 that I was the next in line. I didn't go to college, never even filled out an application. My school counselor tried to talk to me once about scholarships and careers. She had this brochure in her hand, something with a smiling kid holding a laptop on a campus lawn. I told her it wasn't going to happen. She thought I meant we couldn't afford it. I didn't bother correcting her. Let her think it was about the money. The truth would have made her very uncomfortable, and I've never been the type to talk more than I have to. I wasn't raised like other kids. I didn't have baseball practice or summer camps. I had morning drills with Dad. Every Saturday at dawn, rain or shine, he'd wake me up, hand me a wooden dowel the size of a sword handle, and we'd practice. Not flashy, movie-style stuff, just stance, grip, movement. He taught me how to move my feet so I wouldn't trip in gravel. Taught me how to read signs in dirt. Taught me how to tell when a smile is too wide or when someone's voice is a little too smooth. That's one of the first things you learn. Vampires don't all act the same. They don't all wear black or slink around like they've got something to hide. They adapt. They learn fast. Down south, they sing a lot. They've got these syrupy voices, like honey poured over warm cornbread. Sweet and slow. Folks let their guard down real easy down there. In Boston, they're a little different. Rude, even. Talk fast, move faster. Can't waste time when the city doesn't sleep. In Asia, they're more connected, networked, less individual predators, and more like cells in a bigger thing. That part scares me more than anything. Cities, that's where the worst ones hide. They've been there longer. They've learned how to blend. Some run companies. Others work late-night shifts. The longer they're around people, the more natural they seem. You might be wondering if I resented it. The training, the pressure, the strange lifestyle. I didn't. I still don't. I never had that weird teenage crisis of who am I or what do I want to be. I knew. I always knew. When my friends were flipping through career books, I was memorizing bloodlines. When they went to prom, I was practicing how to disable someone without killing them. I didn't envy them. I didn't even think they were wrong. Just different. It's not a glamorous life. No awards, no recognition. Nobody throws you a parade when you stop something very bad from spreading. You just pack up and drive to the next place. But there's something clean about it. Something honest. When I hunt, I know exactly who I am. There's no guesswork, no pretending. I don't lie to myself about the world being fair or people always being good way deep down. I see things as they are. My mom taught me that part. She wasn't a hunter like my dad. She was the researcher. She tracked patterns, kept logs, wrote down everything they learned, what worked, what didn't, what changed from place to place. She'd sit at the kitchen table late into the night, poring over old cases. Her handwriting sharp and neat, like every letter mattered. She'd say things like, "They get smarter every year," or, "You have to listen more than you talk." Dad handled the fighting. Mom handled the thinking. And I learned both. Some people think hunting's all about strength. It's not. It's about patience, about listening, about knowing when not to act. Sometimes you wait 3 weeks in a town without doing a damn thing, just watching, listening, following a trail that might not lead anywhere. But if you're lucky and quiet and careful, you'll find something. And if you're not careful, it'll find you first. I've been at it on my own for, 7 years now, since I was a teen. Dad passed away before I finished my training, but he left enough behind for me to keep going. Notes, letters, tips on places to avoid, people to trust. There's a woman in Ohio who makes custom weapons, a trucker who runs supplies across state lines, no questions asked, a preacher in Louisiana who can tell when someone's not quite human. These aren't friends, they're contacts. That's another thing you learn. You don't get too close to anyone. Sooner or later, you'll have to leave. Or bury them. I'm writing this down now because, well, someone has to. Mom kept records. She said memory fades, but ink lasts. It's my turn now. Every little thing matters. Patterns, words, faces. Someday, someone else will need this. Like I did. So I write it all down. My name is Abel. I'm a vampire hunter. And these are my stories. I was 18 the first time I killed a vampire. That age where you don't feel like a kid anymore, but you still think like one. You're out of school, no longer told where to go or when to wake up, and yet you haven't really lived anything. There's a strange confidence that comes with that in between. You believe you're ready for the world, mostly because you don't know what the world is capable of. My father used to say that 18 was a dangerous age. You have energy and instinct, but your judgment hasn't caught up yet. He called it the edge and said everyone has to fall off at once. For me, it happened in rural Kansas, inside a church basement that had gone sour without anyone noticing. I was staying in town to help one of my dad's old friends fix a roof and look into some local rumors. Nothing official, just quiet work, watching from a distance. But trouble never follows your calendar. It shows up when it wants to. After service one Sunday morning at St. Luke's, the local priest pulled me aside near the gravel parking lot. His shirt collar was loose, and his hands shook when he spoke. He didn't ask questions or explain himself, just passed me a folded piece of paper and told me to read it later. Alone. I waited until I was a few blocks away before I opened it. The handwriting was messy. It read, "I believe something is hiding in the basement. Please come after dark, and do not bring anything that looks like a weapon." That last part told me the priest had a gut feeling about what he was dealing with. He didn't know the rules, not in full, but he understood enough to keep quiet and not make a scene. I returned to the church the next evening, just after sundown. The main doors were locked, but the priest met me at the side entrance near the rectory garden. He didn't say much. We walked through the narrow back hallway, past classrooms and storage closets, and eventually came to the stairs behind the altar that led to the basement. Then he left, telling me he couldn't bear to find out what devil had been haunting the basement. He offered a prayer, and back up he went. As soon as I stepped down the first few steps, I could feel the shift in the air. The wood underfoot creaked more than it should have, and the temperature dropped with each level. I stopped at a narrow door marked storage. I opened it with a brass key the priest had given me, and stopped. There were empty blood bags, medical grade, scattered nearby, torn apart with sharp teeth and carelessness. The light overhead was dim and flickering, but I could make out a figure crouched in the corner, partially hidden by an old wire rack. He was humming. Not a melody I recognized, just a soft, slow sound, like he was keeping rhythm with his breath. As I stepped closer, I saw him more clearly. A man in a tailored vest with his sleeves rolled to the elbow, kneeling over a half-torn blood bag. He didn't see me. That's something they do. When they feed, they lose their awareness. It's a moment of weakness, kind of like being drunk. They forget they're predators, forget the world outside is their prey. My father taught me that if you ever catch one in that state, you don't hesitate, and you don't wait for it to turn and recognize you. You act. I stepped forward fast and drove the sharpened chair leg I'd been carrying into the upper back, aiming low between the shoulder blades. The man jerked violently. His body collapsed onto the floor in a heavy sprawl. I pulled the stake out and struck again, this time straight through the middle. He twitched once, then stopped moving. The vampire didn't look special in death. No claws, no monstrous transformation. Just a man in clean clothes with a little blood on his collar, until his body began to break down. Within seconds, the skin cracked, the muscle caved in, and he disintegrated into a pile of fine ash. The smell hit me next, sharp and bitter, like coffee grounds soaked in cheap alcohol. It stung the nose, clean and unnatural. I left the room and locked the door behind me. The priest was waiting upstairs, pacing in the hallway. When he saw my face, he stopped. "It's done. You don't have to worry about him anymore," I said. He opened his mouth like he wanted to ask a question, but nothing came out. And I gave him a warning before I left. Don't open your doors to strangers anymore. If someone stops outside and asks to come in, even if they sound friendly, even if they look like they belong, do not let them pass the threshold. If they were human, they wouldn't have to ask, I said. My father came into town the following day. I didn't go into detail. He could read the aftermath without being told. It wasn't a hard case to solve. Just a simple stray vampire with no backup and no real plan. The kind that slips into a place unnoticed and feeds quietly until someone gets wise. It was more like taking out a nest of bugs than anything else. No mess, no moral knots to untangle. We spent the day reinforcing the church, replacing logs, spreading salt in the corners, and fixing the window frames. When it was done, he dusted off his hands and looked at me. Then he gave me a single pat on the back. And that was the moment I knew that I wasn't on the edge anymore. I'd gone over. There wasn't any going back to before. Not mentally, not spiritually, not in any way that counted. I'd crossed the line. The next one happened when I was up north in Chicago. I was there on business. But I'll admit something. I like the city. The lights made everything glow like it was on fire, and the buildings stretched so tall, they looked like they were leaning over you. I love the buzz of it. The mess, the noise, the way everyone always seemed just a little pissed off, but, never surprised. The people don't hide who they are, and that went a long way with me. They'd curse you out, cut in front of you in line, and maybe even shoulder you without an apology. But they meant what they said. You didn't have to waste time figuring them out. And the food? The best I ever had came out of a kitchen that could barely fit the chef himself. I ate standing up in an alley behind the place because the shop had no seating. Didn't matter. The bread was still warm, and the meat had this spice that stayed on your tongue like it was making a case for itself. Even now, I remember the taste better than most of the faces. But I wasn't there for a vacation. I'd been tracking a vampire that had slipped out from Oak Brook. Mid-level parasite, smart enough to relocate before people caught on. I followed its trail to a nightclub on the west side, the kind that didn't bother with signage or security. You only got in if someone thought you were cool enough or dangerous enough. I wasn't either, but I knew how to look like I belonged. The place was packed, people sweating under pulsing lights, music thudding loud enough to blur your thoughts. I was on the second-level walkway, keeping eyes on the far corner where my mark had disappeared half an hour earlier. He was the type that moved slow in crowds, like he was walking through fog. Real vampires do that sometimes. They never rush anymore. Not like us humans living on borrowed time. And then, just as the bass dropped into another song, I heard a gunshot from the alley outside. It cracked against the back wall like a whip, sharp and unmistakable. Some people turned. Most didn't. I didn't wait. I slipped out the back entrance. In the alley, I saw two figures. One of them was already running, fast and crooked, stumbling down the narrow lane toward the street. The other was standing still, silver gun raised, smoke still curling from the barrel. I moved in quickly and looked down at the pavement near the doorway. The blood on the ground wasn't pooling. It was sizzling where it hit the concrete. And that was all I needed to see. Only one kind of blood does that. "You shot a vampire," I said. The kid turned to me, probably around 17 or 18, wearing a jacket with too many pockets and a patch on the sleeve I didn't recognize. His hands were slightly shaking, not from fear it looked like, but from adrenaline. He was riding the high of it. "Damn right I did. I clipped him, I think," he said. I stepped closer. Yeah, you don't shoot in a crowd. You don't fire in a nightclub alley where they're still feeding and you have no clue how many are inside. You shoot, it runs, and now it's hungry and pissed off with no leash, I said. He raised an eyebrow like I just insulted his mother. "You a hunter?" "Vampire hunter, yeah. You?" I replied. He gave a half smile, then pointed to the patch on his sleeve. "Institute. Monster Division. Name's Milo." And that was when it all made sense. Vampire hunters and monster hunters, we don't mix well. We're cousins, not brothers. Same family tree, but on branches that don't speak unless they have to. I was homeschooled, in a way. Trained by my father, who was trained by his father, tested by small-town cases and long drives. These institute kids, they go to training camps and sleep in bunkhouses, write field reports, and do tests on werewolves in glass cages. I mean, come on. I've never liked the way they walk into a place with their heads already full of theory. Dad said they'd increased their efforts in recruitment the last 7 years. In my opinion, that just meant the newer ones were more full of shit. Milo looked at me and shrugged. "Whatever, man. It's handled." "No, dude, it's not. It got away," I began. "That's not handled. You left a live one with no plan, no tail, no scent trail, and a wound to remind it who burned it," I said. He made some smart-ass comment I don't remember word for word. Something about how I sounded like a dad who used to walk uphill both ways. I didn't respond. There wasn't any point. I spent the next 4 days tracking the one he'd let slip. I followed a missing persons report that matched the profile. The vampire had holed up in a shuttered apartment complex near the edge of Little Village, a place scheduled for demolition that never quite got there. No one checked it anymore. The door was chained shut from the outside, but the inside told me everything I needed to know. The smell of decay was thick. There were drag marks on the floor, dry blood trails leading down into the basement. I marked the door frames, set the garlic smoke canister near the stairwell, and laid sage at each window crack. When the time came, I lit the fuse and waited. The smoke went down first, thick and sharp, designed to disorient and sting. I followed right after, stake in hand, ears tuned to movement. He came out of the dark fast, but not fast enough. His face was half burned from the herbs, eyes watering, body uncoordinated. The stake hit home on the second try. He made a gurgling sound and collapsed without ceremony. I stayed for a long while after that, just to make sure no one else was hiding. I never saw Milo again in Chicago. He probably got sent to some other city, or back to whatever institute dorm they were keeping him in. Now, most of my tips come from people, regular ones. A bartender who noticed a regular stopped drinking. A janitor who found weird stains in a school basement. a pawn shop owner who swore a guy pawned a Rolex soaked in something that wasn't water. But when I'm in a city, I have one guy I go to first. Zazo. He's a goblin. Lives in the sewer systems under the city. Says he likes the smell. And I don't question it. Zazo's not exactly friendly, but he's reliable. You give him what he wants, and he tells you everything. He doesn't take cash, and he doesn't care about favors. He only wants two things: fresh apple beer and full-size Snickers bars. Has to be both. One without the other, and he'll throw it back at you. He's done it to me a couple times. This time, I brought 2 6-packs and a plastic bag with 6 bars, still cold from the cooler. He sniffed them both before he even looked me in the eye.
You finally bring me the real kind, or did you get that light crap again?
He said. Yeah, it's regular apple beer, and 6 whole Snickers full size. You counted last time, I said. Zazo let out a wheezing sound that might have been a laugh. He took the bag and popped one of the beers open using his sharp little teeth. He drank half of it in one go, foam sticking to his chin like shaving cream.
All right. You brought what I like. What do you want?
He asked. I told him about a small suburban neighborhood on the edge of the city. Quiet place. Nothing remarkable. But lately, the police blotter had started filling up with low-level crimes. Break-ins, missing pets, theft, minor arson. More troubling was the spike in homeless disappearances. People thought it was a coincidence or maybe a serial killer. I knew better. When the most vulnerable start disappearing first, it usually means something is feeding. Zazo nodded slowly as I spoke, his eyes narrowing with each word.
Yeah, you're right. Something's in the water. Word is a coven's been growing fast. Got too big for their old holes, so they've been spreading out. City to city, tasting what's new. Trying to get smarter, he said.
He licked chocolate off his fingers before continuing.
Well, they're not all together. The coven, it's like a big tree. You've got the root, but 100 branches. You're looking at one of those small branches, a side group. Greedy little freaks. Didn't wait for orders. Just marched in and started feeding.
Where? I asked.
He grinned. Abandoned laundromat. East side. It's a front. No one washes clothes there. Not even the rats. It's the entrance to their nest. And your problem is only gonna get worse. They're sloppy. They're high on blood. And they think no one's watching.
I nodded and stood up. He watched me gather my things.
You know, other hunters come to this city, but none of them respect the value of the informant. They think they can all do it themselves. Kick doors, swing swords, shoot monsters in the middle of the street. Bunch of amateurs, he said.
I handed him another Snickers. Well, that's why I come to you first. He tucked the candy into a pouch on his hip and looked proud, like a king getting tribute. He didn't say goodbye. He never does. I spent the next 3 days planning the bust. These things can't be rushed. Monsters in groups are more dangerous than alone. They get confident. They start organizing. If you take them head on without prep, someone dies. And I've buried too many someones already. I scouted the building first. It looked dead from the outside. Half the windows boarded, signage faded to the point of invisibility. The door was chained shut, but I could see movement inside at night. Not much, just enough to confirm they weren't keeping normal hours. I called in a few people I trusted. One of them was a gear tech who specialized in detection equipment, old Institute dropout who preferred freelancing. Another was a field medic who'd patched me up more than once. I reached out to an Institute hunter for backup. I try to avoid working with them unless I have to, but a good hunter's a good hunter, even if he files reports after. We met twice before the operation. We had garlic canisters, UV flash units, stakes, blades, and enough salt to make the whole place unfriendly for anything with fangs. I went over every escape route, every possible complication, and what to do if the place turned out to be deeper than expected. When the day came, it was God's good Sunday. Morning felt clean, bright sun, families out walking. A perfect day to pretend nothing was wrong. We rolled out quiet. 3 vehicles spaced out over 6 blocks. The laundromat was in a pocket of old buildings and empty storefronts, the kind of spot people pass without noticing. As we approached, I felt that shift again. That sense that something lived behind the walls that didn't belong to our world. I'd felt it before. Never gets easier. I stood across the street for a moment, looking at the chipped paint and rusted siding. The windows were dark. No sound came from inside. No movement either. But I knew better. I could feel it in my teeth. The whole place was tense. "You ready?" the Institute guy asked, tightening his vest straps. I didn't answer right away. I was looking at the cracked sign above the door. Spin City Laundry in faded red letters. Probably hadn't run a washer in 10 years. I adjusted the strap on my pack, checked the stake at my side, and gave a single nod. We surrounded the place just after noon. Streets were mostly empty. The kind of quiet that makes you second guess how loud your boots are. There were 5 of us. I took point on the front door with the Institute guy watching my 6. 2 others circled around back to seal off the alley. The last stayed posted on the side in case anything tried to slip out through the basement windows. We laid garlic along the back wall and window sills. It burns their lungs and eyes, but that's not always enough. Silver is better. Some say real silver is God's metal, that no matter what kind of monster you're dealing with, it burns them the same. Vampire, ghoul, siren, even the nice ones that just want to be left alone. Doesn't matter. Silver makes them bleed and scream. It's like we were given one thing, just one, to defend ourselves with. Something they can't undo or outgrow. Their speed, their teeth, their unnatural power doesn't mean much when silver touches them. I loaded my gun with silver rounds and gave the signal. A sharp wave of my hand down and a short nod. Then we moved. The front door led straight into the laundromat. Cracked tile floor, 3 dead machines, a broken vending unit, and fluorescent lights that blinked. We cleared the front quickly. Nothing there but mildew and bad wiring. The real action was behind the false wall, through a busted out door frame where the plaster had been torn off and a narrow hall led into the attached house. It was hotter in there, thick with smoke. Someone had been burning incense non-stop, a heavy mix of dried herbs that clung to your skin and made your head swim. The air stung my eyes. I pulled up a cloth mask over my nose and motioned for the others to do the same. And then I saw them. People, at least 10, maybe more, scattered through the living room and into the hallway. All of them were unconscious or close to it. Some curled into cushions like they'd passed out mid-conversation. Most were women and unhoused men. All of them had pale skin and dark stains at the neck. Not fresh wounds, just slow, steady feeding. They were being kept in a fog, breathing in sedatives while their blood was taken little by little. I gave the signal, sharp and short. We moved in silently, each of us grabbing one person at a time and carrying him out. I watched every exit as my team moved back and forth like clockwork. One by one, the bodies were hauled out and laid onto tarps in the lot out front, where the medic could check vitals and prep IV drips. Most of them would live, though I'd bet a few wouldn't remember much beyond a blur of heat and sleep. Once the last victim was out, I motioned for 2 men to follow me. We cleared the hallway and turned the corner, where a stairwell climbed to a second floor. The carpet was matted with dirt and dark spots. I stepped lightly, gun raised. At the top of the stairs was the master bedroom. The door was halfway open, and something inside moved. I stepped in first. The room was dim. Thick curtains blocked out the sun. In the corner, crouched low over a figure slumped on a stained mattress, was a vampire. It didn't turn when we entered. Its face was buried against the victim's neck, body hunched, back rising and falling as it drank. The victim was still twitching, a young man, probably homeless, dragged off the street like the others. We didn't speak. I fired first. The silver round caught the vampire in the shoulder. The second man fired a moment after me, catching it in the hip. The creature howled and turned towards us, blood still dripping from its mouth. Its eyes were wide, more animal than human. It lunged. The third bullet missed. It knocked my partner down with a blow across the head and leapt for me. I didn't wait. I pulled the trigger again. The fourth bullet hit straight through the heart. It froze mid-motion, mouth still parted. Then it dropped. We stood still for a moment, gun still raised. My teammate on the ground cursed under his breath and sat up slowly. I pulled him back toward the wall and told him to sit still until the medic arrived. He nodded, eyes glassy. I was about to call it in when I heard something small from across the room. A faint thump. I turned and followed the sound to the bedroom closet. Inside, curled up on a pile of old towels, was a girl, 12 maybe. Thin arms, scraped knees, dirt on her face. She wore a UCLA t-shirt that was much too big for her, the kind of shirt you might find in a donation bin or on a sale rack for 50 cents. She didn't scream. She just looked at me with wide eyes and didn't move. "You're safe," I said. She didn't answer right away. Her eyes went wide, and her hands gripped the hem of the oversized shirt. I kept my voice low and steady. "What's your name?" I asked. "Maya." "Hi, Maya. I'm Abel." She nodded, still not blinking. "Can you tell me how you got here?" I asked. I don't know. A man said I could wait inside for my mom. He said it was warm. And then I woke up in the closet." "You did good, Maya. You stayed quiet." I held out my arms. "Is it okay if I carry you?" She nodded again, slower this time. When I lifted her, she wrapped one arm around my neck, weak but sure. "You're gonna be all right. We're taking you to someplace safe," I said. Outside, the team cleared a space. We laid her gently onto a stretcher. She was breathing steady. The medic looked over her and nodded. I stayed long enough to ride with her to the Hunter-sanctioned hospital on the edge of town. The staff knew what to do. Discreet, fast, trained to handle situations like this without asking questions they didn't want answers to. I stayed until she was stable, then slipped out before press or family could show up. The case was closed. Victims rescued. Threat eliminated. Everyone would sleep a little easier, at least for a while. But I made a note in my journal that night. There was only one vampire in the house. One. That didn't sit right with me. A whole coven doesn't move in and only leave one behind. That's not how they operate. After the job, I stuck around for a few extra days, worked with the Institute guys to access their older reports, cross-check missing persons cases, feeding patterns, relocation logs. Then I called my mom. She still keeps tabs on movement trends, even in retirement. Between her notes and what I saw, the pattern was clear. Covens have been moving more, not just growing, but spreading out, shifting territory, faster and more coordinated than before. That means one thing. There's more work ahead. Well, I'm 30 now. My friends, the few I've kept, like to joke that I'm going gray around the sideburns. They say I'm aging like a war veteran, 10 years ahead of schedule. I tell them it's just the lighting. Truth is, they're right, and I don't mind. You don't do this job expecting to look young forever. You do it knowing every year you get is earned. Zazo's still around, same as always. Still in the sewer, still picky about his apple beer, still counting the Snickers bars before he talks. He says I'm the only one who brings the good kind, the kind with the crunchy peanuts and no funny labels. I bring him what he asks for, and he keeps me in the loop. There are worse arrangements. As for me, I'm still out there, still chasing things that most people don't want to know exist, still watching alleyways, checking basements, taking quiet calls from voices that are too afraid to go to the police. The cities change, the names, the faces, the news cycles, they move fast. But the monsters don't. They're patient. They wait. And as long as they're out there, I'll be hunting. All I ever wanted was a dog. That may be hard for some of you to believe, but it's true. Guess what my first word was? I'll give you one try, and here's the hint. It wasn't a cat. Now granted, I said doggy and not dog, but same difference. Yep, before saying mom or dad or Santa Claus or whatever it is that children say when they finally decided to move their mouths, I made it clear I was a dog person. Now here's the cruelty of it. My mother hated dogs. Wasn't her fault exactly. She'd been bitten as a kid by a golden retriever of all things. Yes, imagine Air Bud giving my poor sweet mother a lifelong terror of one of life's best creations. I asked her about it when I was older. She said it was a neglectful younger couple. Left their dog outside all the time for years on a small chain tied to a tree. I can understand why I was angry. That's not any life for a dog, especially something as smart as a golden. Well, one evening Mom was walking by. Maybe it wanted company, because it snapped that leash off, ran right at her, and bit her on the ankle. She said it drew blood. Nothing terrible or anything, but it was enough to scar her for life. So anyway, you can imagine that my mom was less than thrilled by my first word. I mean, how does that even happen exactly? We didn't even have a dog. She'd never allowed dogs over. My mom couldn't figure it out. She must have racked her head good on that one. Eventually, she just defaulted to, must have left the TV on and some stupid dog movie was playing. Tell you the truth, though, I don't think that was it. I think it was something more. And I suppose that's where our story begins. Well, try as I might, I could not get Mom to let me have a dog. 3 times I tried to bring a dog home. Serious tries, at least. 7, if you count the more stupid ideas. And every time I brought one home, or tried to dog sit for a neighbor, or anything, Mom would freak out and say, absolutely not under any circumstances. And we'd stay mad at each other for exactly 24 hours. Not sure why it worked like that, but it did. Now, there are positives and negatives to childhood. Good things and bad. The good, you don't have to get a job, you don't have to worry about the stock market, and you don't have to show up to a job you hate 20 years in a row. You can play baseball outside as late as you want, go on adventures, not worry about a damn thing. But, and this is a big one, if your mom absolutely hates dogs, there is not a thing you can do about it. On May 20th, 2010, that all changed. I turned 18, and by 6 a.m., I'd packed my bags, thrown them into a rusty Ford Cavalier outside I got for $1,100, and was headed to the local animal shelter. Now, over the previous year, I had stopped by Angel's Animal Shelter no less than 19 times. I ended up getting a part-time job there, around visit number 6. Nothing glamorous, mostly cleaning cages, walking dogs, restocking food bins. Fred said if I was going to be haunting the place anyway, might as well get paid for it. So I did. I worked Saturdays and a few afternoons after school, just enough to keep gas in the Cavalier and my foot in the door. It was kind of torture though, because when I saw a dog I liked, what exactly could I do? I could just wait and wait. By now, I knew every face in the kennel, or at least I thought I did. "Hey there, youngster." Fred grinned as I parked the Cavalier. Badly, I might add. "Is it that time already? Man, a year flew by, huh?" "You kidding me?" I began. "This year was slow. Longest year of my life," I replied. "Well, it's a good thing you're only 18 then." Fred grinned. "You'll have longer years, trust me." Fred was average height, a little heavyset, looking to be going on, 60. He was the owner, the manager, and janitor, and whatever else needed to be done in the place. We'd gotten along well from the start, and he knew today was going to be a challenge. "Any newcomers?" I asked. Fred shook his head, taking a sip of coffee from a world's best boss mug, which he most certainly got himself. "Since 8 p.m. last night? No, I think not. If anyone knows this entire roster, it's you, kid." I nodded, deep in thought. Fred took out his Grateful Dead key loop, found the right one, and with a slow creak, the kennel door opened. We began our rounds. "Well, Border Collie? Maybe. German Shepherd? Maybe. You know which one? Maybe." Fred chuckled. I paced, looking through each door, and just then something strange happened. I heard a new bark. There was a room at the very end of the corridor, storage, I thought. I'd never seen any dogs kept back there. But that bark definitely came from behind it. "Hey, Frank, that come from that room way back there?" "No." "You sure?" "Yes." "Yeah, I'm pretty sure there's another dog in that back room, Frank." He sighed, pulled out his key ring again, and walked slowly towards the back room and the sound. "There's something wrong with this one," he began. "He can take a look, but we gotta put him down next week. Angriest animal I have ever seen." "He bites someone?" I asked, as Frank fiddled with his keychain, still searching. No, nothing like that. Damn thing just showed up here last week. Stood outside in the back lot and growled something terrible at everyone who came near it. Took damn near 3 hours, but I wrangled him in here. Least it wasn't far." Frank pushed the doorway open halfway, then paused. "I am serious, kid. You can take a look and see for yourself, but you ain't getting this one. Angriest animal I have ever seen, and I have seen some doozies. Don't let anyone near it, so stay back, see for yourself, and..." Before Frank could finish, I'd pushed the old steel door open the rest of the way, and taken a quick step in. Kinda dark in here now. Yeah, light's busted. I'm working on it," he replied.
Taking another step forward, I saw a tall cage, floor to ceiling, about 4 feet in front of me, though I couldn't see anything inside. Having no fear of dogs and being curious, I quickly stepped forward, pressing my face near the bars of the cage. Hey, don't," Fred began, but it was too late. I had made a terrible mistake. The beast had taken that opportunity to rush forward out of the darkness, leap onto the bars of the cage where my face was, and lick me. I laughed. "I'll be damned," Frank muttered. The beast paced the bars inside, gently whining as it looked up at me. A note closer. Hey, don't do that," Fred continued, but he was too late. It walked closer, put its paws against the bars, and licked my face again. I placed my hand on his head, rubbed it, and we just sat for a few moments. "Oh, I don't get it, but you're still not keeping this thing. Not safe." "What is he?" I asked. I don't know. I had to guess. I'd say part German Shepherd, part wolf. You can tell from the paws and the eyes." I continued to pet the thing. He'd laid down against the bars, put his head on the floor, and closed his eyes like he trusted me. "Look, kid, doesn't matter if for some reason he likes you. You can't take this one. He's a mess, angry as hell, and according to Ordinance number 94, no citizen in Sheffield County can legally own a wolf." "Well, I guess we're gonna have to keep it to ourselves then," I replied. "And you don't even know for sure he's a wolf anyway." "Kid, you aren't?" "All right, Fred, give me his papers. I'll take him," I said, cutting him off again as I rubbed the dog's head. Frank looked down at the floor and said, "Your mother is gonna kill me." Now, my Uncle Todd had a small cabin down by the lake. Had been in the family for years, though I'd only been there once. It was an old, run-down place about 7 miles off the highway, but it had electricity, running water, and most importantly, I could have a dog. Todd said I could have the place as long as I liked, as long as I cleaned it up a bit, fixed a thing or two, and left it better off than when I'd found it. Fair enough, I thought. The beast, I still hadn't named him yet, sat upright in the back seat of my Cavalier, looking out at the trees and calm water of the lake as we passed. He didn't bark, didn't pant, didn't make a sound, actually. Just stared out the window in total silence. When we arrived at the cabin, it was late afternoon. I opened the car door to let him out, said, "Come on, boy." And that was that. He jumped out, licked the side of my pants, and was close by my side as I opened the trunk and got out supplies. A couple big jugs of water, just in case, a couple days worth of canned food and noodles. "I forgot dog food," I said. "I guess you're eating noodles, dude." He seemed to be okay with that. I walked up the muddy drive and stepped onto the porch of the old cabin. "All right, come on, boy," I called. But he didn't move. He'd followed me thus far, but now he stood right at the precipice of the first wooden step, and he'd go no further. He growled up at me. No, not at me. At something behind me. It took some pushing and beef jerky, but I managed to get the dog inside, though he was not happy about it. We went through the old place together. I planned to stay here over the summer, so I wanted to take inventory. As I said, the cabin hadn't been used in years, and the more I went through it, the more I realized why.
It started to rain around mid-afternoon. The droplets of water bouncing off the tin roof were calming, but they came with a problem. Leaks. A lot of leaks. 5, in fact, but fortunately my Uncle Todd had left a fair share of buckets, and it was easy enough to plop one under each drip. 2 in the kitchen, 1 in the guest bedroom directly onto the bed, which looked to have about 200 years of dust on the yellowed sheets, 1 in the living area directly in front of the fireplace, and 1 in the bathroom that fortunately happened to fall directly into the sink, saving me a bucket. If you've ever lived in a leaky house, it's not a nice feeling. Comes with constant vigilance, stress, and likely mold. But you get used to it after a while. It's always annoying, but I suppose it becomes less annoying. I don't know. What I do know is that the leaks weren't critical anymore. They were contained, and that was good enough for me. With the rain came the cold, but a few dry twigs, newspapers, an old log, and a box of matches, and we were off to the races. The fireplace in the main area roared to life, and I plopped down on the couch. The dog lay down between me and the fireplace and closed his eyes like this had always been his home. "Wolf," I said suddenly. He looked up at me. "You know, I have really been overthinking this. Your name should be Wolf." He turned his giant head sideways at me in thought, and then closed his eyes and turned back to the fireplace. He seemed to agree. Wolf it is. I shook out an old blanket, set it down on the old couch near Wolf, and we both drifted off to sleep. I awoke to a low growl, and it took me a moment to get my bearings. Right. Cabin, fireplace, Wolf. A flash of lightning, and then a low rumble lit up the cabin window above the porch. Wolf got up and trotted over cautiously to peer outside. Thunder. Louder this time. "What is it?" I asked him. He looked over at me, then quickly back out towards the storm. I was glad he was here. He didn't bark, didn't whine, just kept staring through the foggy glass into the rain. Another flash of lightning, and for half a second, I thought I saw something. Not movement, not a person, just a shape. Tall, upright, and then it was gone. I stood slowly, walked toward the window, leaned over Wolf to get a better look. Nothing. Just the trees swaying and the black lake beyond. "You saw something?" I asked him. He didn't move, but his ears twitched. And that's when I heard something. A thumping sound. It wasn't thunder. It came again 5 seconds later. Heavy, dull, like something dragging a tree trunk through mud. Not fast, not frantic, just deliberate. I reached over to the kitchen counter and clicked off the lantern, letting the room fall into shadow. Another flash of lightning, and this time I saw it clearly. Something stepped between 2 trees, maybe 20 yards from the porch. It moved on 2 legs, but it wasn't a person. It was hunched, long-armed, with something hanging off its back. Looked like fur. Its face. I couldn't see a face. Just blank. Like the skin didn't fold right. Like it'd been pulled tight over something it didn't belong to. Wolf growled low. I moved to the fireplace and picked up one of the tools. It wasn't much, but it was solid, and it felt better than standing there with empty hands. I could see the creature take a step closer. I couldn't see it clearly anymore, but I heard it. Mud sucking underfoot. Something heavy brushing past low-hanging branches.
And then I heard it on the porch. Wolf stood. His fur bristled down his spine. Something touched the doorknob. I tightened my grip and backed slowly toward the hallway. The knob began to turn. Left, right. And then it stopped. Silence. I held my breath. Wolf let out a low, vibrating growl, his body stiffening like a statue. And then, the front door slammed open so hard it cracked against the wall behind it. Wind burst in, flinging leaves, dirt, and rain in the cabin. And standing in the doorway, framed by lightning and the dark trees behind it, was this thing. Its head tilted sideways, like it was trying to understand what it was looking at. Wolf lunged and crashed into its legs with a snarl, driving it back onto the porch. The thing shrieked like metal shearing against glass, and they tumbled into the rain. Wolf bit into its arm, shaking with everything he had. The creature slammed him against the ground once and then twice, and Wolf yelped but didn't let go. I raised the fireplace poker, stepped into the rain, and it looked at me. It didn't have eyes. It let go of Wolf and took one step toward me, and I swung as hard as I could. It connected with a wet crack, like hitting soaked leather. The thing barely flinched. It swiped back, claws cutting through my shirt, slicing near my ribs. I stumbled back into the doorway and hit the floor hard. Wolf hit it again, this time going for the legs. It hissed, and then it was just gone. The whole thing was maybe 30 seconds. I lay there, blinking upwards, rain dripping down my face. Wolf came and sat next to me, panting, soaked, shaking. I put my hand on his back. The fire was still crackling inside, barely. I didn't speak. The fire crackled low. Rain tapped against the walls like fingers drumming in thought. Then Wolf shifted. He let out a soft grunt and tried to stand, but his back leg buckled halfway. He yelped and dropped back down, panting hard. I moved to him quickly. Easy, buddy. That leg, his rear right, was already swelling. 3 long scratches trailed down his thigh, angry and red. He hadn't let on before, hadn't made a sound. Tough dog. But now, he wasn't walking far. I looked at the door, then at the window. The rain outside had turned to a sideways sheet, streaking past in waves. Thunder rumbled again, more distant this time. All right, we're not waiting around, I said aloud, more to myself than to him. I grabbed my keys, slung on a soaked hoodie, and looked over my shoulder. All right, come on, we're getting out of here. Wolf stood slowly, limped towards the door. I opened it, helped him down the steps. The wind shoved at us, rain slapping my face so hard I could barely keep my eyes open. The car sat where I left it, half sunk into the mud and gravel. I yanked open the back door and patted the seat. Okay, in. Wolf hesitated, then climbed in awkwardly, curling against the fabric with a low whine. I slammed the door and got in the driver's side. Keys in. Deep breath. No turnover. I twisted the key again. Dash lights flickered, then died. Come on. Nothing. No engine. Just rain. I shoved the door open and popped the hood, storm punching me in the chest as I stumbled to the front. Lifted it. The engine was soaked and cold, And the wires, they were shredded. The harness had been torn apart like spaghetti, gnawed through, not clean, not like a knife. This was claws or teeth. Shit, I whispered. The rain was getting heavier. I could barely hear my own breathing. I looked around, and nothing but black trees and water. Something had been here. Maybe it was still here. I dropped the hood hard, got back in the car with Wolf watching me, his breathing shallow. It's no good. We're not going anywhere, I said. I looked at his leg again. There was no way we'd make a hike in this weather. I could see barely 5 feet ahead. Slippery rock trails, flooded gullies, branches falling left and right. And I wasn't leaving him behind. That wasn't even an option. I reached over, scratched his head once, then quickly opened the door again. All right, come on, back inside. We limped together slowly to the cabin, soaked to the bone. My clothes clung cold and heavy. Wolf slipped once on the porch step, whined, but kept moving. I shut the door behind us and threw the latch. The inside felt warmer somehow. Still awful, still terrifying, but less exposed. Okay. All right, we're staying. The front door was cracked where it slammed open. I touched the frame, splintered. One hinge loose. It would barely hold another hit. So I started barricading. Old dresser, flipped and shoved against the door. Coffee table on its side. The couch dragged in from the corner. Anything heavy I could move with my own 2 hands got stacked, wedged, or leaned. The window was worse. Glass shattered. Frame bowed. I tore down an old cabinet door from the kitchen wall and nailed it over the hole with bent nails and a hammer I found in a drawer. Not airtight, but hopefully enough to slow something down. Thunder rolled again, closer this time. I found another blanket and tossed it over Wolf. He licked his paw, but didn't protest. I looked at the fireplace. The flames were dying. Good, I thought. Let it go dark. Let it think we'd left. I sank to the floor next to him, back against the couch. My breath came slow, controlled. I could hear the wind press against the outside walls, hear the trees groaning in the storm. Every now and then, I thought I heard a footstep. Hopefully that was just the house settling. But maybe not. I didn't say anything else. We just waited. The storm raged against the walls like it wanted in. Wind pushed and howled through the gaps in the window frame, slapping rain sideways into the boards I'd hastily nailed up. The fire was down to embers. I left it that way. No need to advertise we were still in here. Wolf lay beside me, one leg tucked awkwardly under him, chest rising and falling in steady, shallow breaths. Every so often, his ears twitched, and his eyes flicked toward the walls. He wasn't sleeping tonight. Neither was I. And then came a new sound. Not thunder, not wind. Scraping. I froze. Wolf's head shot up. It was coming from the back of the cabin, low, dragging, just beneath the floorboards. The crawl space. Shit, I whispered. I stood slowly and crossed to the kitchen. Wolf tried to follow, but stumbled. I motioned him to stay. The sound continued, deliberate and slow. The back of the cabin had an old cellar-style trap hatch led to the crawl space. I hadn't thought to check it earlier. I didn't even know if it was still latched. Apparently, the thing did. I stepped into the narrow hallway that led to the back door. The sound was louder here, right beneath my boots. My breath fogged in front of me. Another scrape, then a creak, wood flexing. I bolted to the end of the hall, threw open the narrow supply closet, and found the cellar latch inside. It was shifting. The hook lock, rusted and old, was bending outward. Something was pushing up from beneath. I slammed the closet shut, shoved my back against it, and screamed for Wolf. He limped into view just as I spotted a hammer and a box of nails on the counter. I grabbed both and drove 2 nails straight through the door frame and into the closet. And then the noise stopped. Silence. Just the sound of our breathing. And then headlights. Blue and red. I blinked hard, heart still racing. A cop car was pulling slowly up the muddy road, tires hissing through puddles. Its spotlight hit the front of the cabin, lighting up the entire porch in harsh white glare. Wolf growled, not as deep as before, more confused. I moved to the front window, careful not to step in the broken glass, and peeked through a crack in the boards. The cruiser rolled to a stop, and the driver's door opened. A man stepped out, mid-50s, stocky, one hand resting on his duty belt. He squinted at the cabin and pulled up his collar against the rain. "Hey, anyone in there?" he called. I looked at Wolf. He stared at me like he knew better. I opened the door anyway. "Hey!" I called. "Don't come closer!" The cop froze on the porch, hand moving instinctively to his sidearm. "Excuse me?" I live here. My uncle owns this place. Listen, there's something out there. You need to get back in your car and... All right. Look, this property's been listed vacant for years, kid. I know. Look, I can explain this later, okay? Right now, we need to go. There's something out here. It's not a person, okay? It's not... His expression shifted, eyes narrowing. He took a slow step forward. You say there's something out here? And then, in the flash of a lightning bolt, it was behind him. The creature stepped out of the woods like it'd been waiting for the cue. No growl, no screech, just fast. Its long arms reached around the cop's shoulders before he could even turn. Behind you, I said. But it was too late. It twisted. The cop's head turned too far, too fast, until it detached completely with a snap, and it thudded against the wet grass. I screamed. Wolf barked sharply behind me. The creature dropped the body like trash and raised its head, that blank, eyeless face locking onto me. I slammed the door and drove the last 2 nails I had into the frame with shaking hands. Wolf limped beside me, fur standing on end, growling low and constant. Outside, the radio from the cruiser crackled to life.
Unit 12, come in.
A wet, dragging sound passed across the porch. Then silence. Wolf and I backed away from the door, side by side, until our backs hit the far wall. The flashing lights still painted the walls in red and blue.
But there was no one left inside that car. The radio kept crackling.
Unit 12, are you there?
Static.
Confirmed status, copy.
I stood frozen, backed in the door. Wolf was beside me, growling low. The cabin felt too small now, too quiet. The kind of quiet that comes right before something bad happens. But there was one chance. The cruiser was still there. Lights still flashing, engine still running. I looked over at Wolf. He looked back, chest still heaving. Hurt, but he was alert. He was waiting for my move. I didn't speak. I just moved fast. I ripped the couch aside, shoved the dresser back just enough to squeeze through, and flung the door open. Rain poured in instantly, cold and blinding. But there was no sign of the thing. The porch was empty. The trees beyond were still. Okay, let's go. Wolf limped after me and down the steps, his good legs doing most of the work. I half ran, half slid through the mud toward the cruiser. Halfway there, I looked left. Movement. The creature was circling the house, slow and hunched, dragging its claws through the dirt like it was drawing something. It saw me, and then it charged. I yanked the cruiser door open and threw myself inside. The keys were still in. Engine purring. The moment I hit the seat, I slammed the lock button. Come on, come on. I reached over and opened the passenger door. Wolf scrambled in, whimpering, and collapsed on the seat. The thing hit the hood hard. Its body cracked the windshield, claws slamming against the glass. I could see its face now, eyeless, wet. It crawled halfway up the roof, thudding as it went. I slammed it into reverse and hit the gas. The cruiser peeled backward, tires splitting mud and gravel. The creature slipped off the roof and rolled to the ground in front of the porch, and I shifted into drive. And then I floored it. The car roared forward, and just as the thing started to rise, we hit it head on. It rolled over the roof with a deep thump, then vanished behind us in the side mirror. I didn't stop. Didn't look back. The road was a blur of trees and mud. Branches slapped the windshield. The car fishtailed on a tight curve, but I held steady. Wolf was panting beside me, bleeding on the seat, his eyes locked on the road ahead. The rain finally started to break. The sky lightened just a little. Not dawn, but less dark. I didn't speak. I just drove. And behind us, somewhere deep in those woods, something screamed. Not like a person. Not like any animal I'd ever heard. Just one long, violent wail that rose and broke apart in the trees. We drove straight to the nearest sheriff's station. Took almost an hour. I was soaked, bleeding, half in shock. Wolf was curled up, silent the whole way. When we got there, I told him everything. Well, almost everything. They asked about the cruiser, the blood, the missing deputy. I gave them what I could. They looked at me like I was nuts, but they still sent 3 cars out to that cabin. They found the house, the broken window, the claw marks on the door. They even found drag marks near the porch. But they didn't find the cop's body. Not a single trace of him. They questioned me for hours, and then they just let me go. Told me to stay close and call if I remembered anything. I didn't. I didn't go back to the cabin.
I never will. But I think about it sometimes. About that night. About whatever that was out there in the storm. And about Wolf. He's still here. He's older now. Still limps sometimes, but he sleeps beside my bed, and whenever thunder rolls in, he gets up, faces the window, and looks out into the storm like he's waiting for something.
My name's Jake. I'm 35 years old, and I drive deliveries for a logistics company based out of Bakersfield. Nothing glamorous. Mostly nighttime freight through California and into Nevada. You'd be surprised how lonely the road gets once you're out past Barstow, especially around midnight. I'd tell myself it was just another night, just another drive. But lately, every stretch of highway felt like a test I was always failing. I wasn't always a nighttime delivery driver. I used to work construction, but a busted knee and a few bad choices landed me here. And now I'm in deep. 10 grand deep to be exact. Gambling. Every win felt like a fix. Every loss, it felt like the start of something worse. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about believing I could still beat the rules. And the guys I owe, oh, they're not the kind you pay off late. So I took extra shifts, volunteered for longer routes, anything to stack up cash fast, which is how I ended up driving a load of engine parts to some warehouse in Carson City by way of Route 86, a route I'd never heard of until that night. I looked at the map the night before, old paper one I kept tucked in a glove box, just in case tech failed. Route 86 curved through a chunk of old forest that didn't show much activity. Still, looked straightforward enough. Quiet roads, no traffic. I figured I'd shave off time and maybe catch a few hours sleep before unloading. I told myself it was just another road. Asphalt, trees, few road signs. But even then, something about the shape of that road on the map, it curled like a hook. Like it was meant to catch something. At first, nothing seemed weird. I drove northeast out of Bakersfield, passing scrubland and the occasional gas station, glowing like a lantern in the dark. I ate a sandwich I'd packed from home, turkey and mustard on white bread, and tried not to think about the debt hanging over me like a second shadow. The night air was dry, my windows cracked to keep me alert. Around 10:30 p.m., I pulled into one of the gas stations to top off the tank and grab a coffee. The place didn't even have a name, just a rusted sign that read service. It looked abandoned at first. One flickering light above the pump, a cracked window, weeds growing through the pavement. But inside, it was alive in a quiet, stubborn kind of way. There was a single aisle of snacks, a humming cooler, and a counter that hadn't seen a mop since Reagan was in office. Behind it sat an old man with a weathered face and one of those trucker caps that might have once been red. He looked up from a tiny black and white TV when I walked in. "Well, which way you headed then?" he said. "Carson City," I replied. "Taking Route 86. His eyes narrowed. "Not after midnight, I hope." I laughed. "Is that a curfew or something?" He didn't smile. "That road's not right after dark. You hit the quarry bend and start climbing, you'll see what I mean." I poured coffee from the stained pot beside the register. "Alright, let me guess. Ghost stories?" He reached under the counter
and pulled out a battered road atlas. Flipping it over, he jabbed a wrinkled finger at a thin gray line. That stretch there used to be tolled back in the 50s. Guy named Granger ran it. Made a killing charging folks to cross a public road. Wouldn't even let ambulances through without payment. Well, one night, someone torched the booth with him inside. I paused. All right, let me guess again. He came back. The man didn't blink. Well, people say he still collects. Only now, he don't ask for coins. I tried to smile, but the way he said it made my stomach twist. There was no teasing in his voice. No wink. Just the flat tone of someone telling you the weather. Well, what does he look like? I asked. Well, he's tall, thin, still wears the old uniform. Burned up real bad. You can still see where the flames caught him. Scorch marks on the collar, blood dried into the sleeves. Some say he's too tall for the booth now. Just stands there without moving. Always watching. Well, that sounds like a Halloween setup, I replied. Yeah, he said, but his voice was quiet now. The only problem is, no one's dressing up. Okay, well, thanks for the heads up, I said, paying for the coffee. Clock's ticking, he said as I walked out. Past midnight, you better turn back if you hit that booth. Back in the truck, I shook it off. Just small town creepiness. Every backwoods road had its legend. Still, I checked the clock on the dash. 11:12 p.m. Plenty of time to clear the pass before midnight. I sipped my coffee, kept one hand steady on the wheel, the other occasionally wiping the condensation off the inside of the windshield. The night had a weight to it, thick and quiet. The kind of quiet where even the road noise seemed dulled, like the truck was driving through cotton. The highway began to stretch and thin, the sparse lights of civilization fading behind me. Each mile farther felt like another thread snapping between me and the world I knew. I passed long shadows cast by telephone poles and fence lines, and the stars above looked sharper than usual, like they were leaning in to watch. I felt the quiet press into the cab, my only company, the rhythmic thrum of tires on asphalt, and the occasional creak of the seat beneath me. The road thinned out completely as I drove. No more lights, no more gas stations. Just blacktop and trees, the headlights punching a tunnel through the dark. My GPS flickered once, then rerouted me onto a smaller side road with a green marker. Old Quarry Pass. The road didn't show on the paper map. I flipped back and forth, searching. Nothing. Just empty space where the turn should have been. And that should have been enough to warn me. The turn looked fine. Paved. Clean. Just empty. I tapped the GPS. It confirmed the route. ETA 12:10 a.m. 10 minutes over, I muttered. Better make up time. I turned onto the pass. The trees closed in almost immediately, leaning like watchers over the road. My brights barely reached past the next bend. The pavement looked newly laid. Too new. Not a single crack. No potholes. Just perfect black ribbon slicing through the hills. I turned the radio knob. Nothing but static. Even the engine seemed quieter than usual. Fine. Quiet's fine. I kept driving. And then I saw it. A booth. A literal toll booth standing in the center of the road, like some forgotten relic. Wood frame, yellowed glass, and a faded sign that said, "Stop. Pay toll." I slowed the truck. Inside the booth stood someone. They were facing me. No movement, no sound. The booth itself looked wrong, like it'd been dropped in from another time. I couldn't see the face, not really. Just the outline of a person. The kind of shape your brain doesn't want to stare at too long. It didn't move. My stomach dropped, and the booth's arm came down. I sat there, staring at the booth, trying to make sense of it. Maybe it was a leftover movie prop, or some weird roadside art installation. Maybe a Halloween setup that never got taken down. But it wasn't fake. It felt wrong in a way I couldn't explain. The arm across the road stayed down, like it knew I was there, and it wasn't letting me through. I reached over and flicked on my high beams. The glare hit the glass and caught on the figure inside. He didn't move, just stood there, head tilted slightly to the side, like he was listening to something far away. I leaned out the window. "Hey, what's the toll?" Nothing. I wasn't about to get out of the truck. I threw it in reverse and backed up a few feet, thinking maybe I could drive around it. But the shoulders were narrow, hemmed in by thick trees and a steep drop to the right. No way around. A sign on the booth's window caught my eye, hand-painted, red letters on a warped white board. Toll must be paid. And then I saw the tray, like the kind you'd find at a bank drive-thru, one of those old metal drawers that slides out. It extended slowly toward me, squealing on unseen rollers. I stared at it. "Look, man, I don't have cash," I said. The figure didn't flinch. The trees rustled on both sides, but there was no wind, just the sound of leaves moving, as if something brushed them from within. I glanced at the mirror. Nothing. Just black and branches. Something came over me then. The feeling that this was wrong. Very wrong. And I had to get out of there now. I did something a little crazy. I took a breath and dropped the truck into gear. The tires squealed as I pushed through the barrier. The arm cracked against the hood and snapped upward, clattering into the trees. I drove straight through, heart hammering. My rear view showed the booth shrinking behind me, bathed in pale light. A mile down, I let out the breath I'd been holding. Nothing followed. No sirens, no headlights. Just me and the empty road. I laughed, shaky, nervous, but a laugh all the same. My hand still clutched the wheel like it might jump out of my grip. "Nice work, Jake. You just got scared by a Halloween prop," I said to myself. The road curved left, then right, then up into the hills. No signs, no exits. The GPS had frozen. Time, 12:01 a.m. Route unknown. I slapped it. Nothing. The trees grew tighter around the truck, like they were creeping inward. My headlights seemed weaker, like the darkness was swallowing the light as fast as it could push it forward. 10 minutes later, the truck sputtered. I glanced at the dash. The fuel gauge was fine. Battery light blinked once, then died. The radio cut out completely. Even the clock on the dash went dark. The headlights dimmed, flickered, then steadied again. I gripped the wheel tighter. A sound rose in the distance. Not engine noise, not wind. It was a chime, high-pitched, familiar.
the ding of a toll bell. Then something brushed my leg. I looked down. The tray. It was inside the cab, the same metal drawer from the booth. It had slid out from beneath the dashboard, even though there was no slot for it. The same tray. I reached to push it back, but it didn't budge. It was locked in place. The cab lights flickered. The windshield fogged instantly, like someone exhaled hard against it. And in the center, words began to appear, drawn by an unseen finger. Pay. I floored it. The tray slid back under the dash with a metallic clunk. The fog on the windshield vanished. The road ahead unrolled in a blur. But it didn't feel like I was going anywhere. The mile markers started over. Mile 4, mile 5, mile 4 again. My throat went dry. I pulled over, trying to get my bearings, trying to breathe. I shut off the engine and listened. Silence. Then footsteps. Soft, scraping the pavement, and getting closer. I locked the doors. The footsteps stopped just behind the truck. I didn't turn around. Instead, I shifted into drive and sped off again, pushing the truck harder than I should have. The road unspooled the same bends, same trees, same faded billboard that read, "Thank you for visiting the Ridge." I passed it 3 times. Each time, the letters seemed a little more twisted, like they weren't meant for tourists anymore. Each time, I felt like something was watching from the trees. And then, just up ahead, the booth, same one, but now it was different. The lights inside burned brighter. The figure inside looked sharper now, more real. The toll tray was already extended. I slammed on the brakes. The truck skidded to a stop, tires screeching. I sat there. He hadn't moved. I hadn't paid the toll. And now he wanted something else. I threw the truck into reverse and slammed the gas. Tires squealed, engine roared. But I only made it 20 feet before the lights flickered again, and the dashboard tray shot out like before. This time there was something in it. My watch? The leather band was frayed. The cracked glass and scuffed casing was unmistakable. It was my father's old watch. I hadn't worn it in years, but I kept it in the glove box. Or at least I thought I did. I opened the glove compartment. Empty. I grabbed the watch from the tray. It was cold. The second hand spun wildly, faster and faster, then stopped. The watch let out a tiny click and just shattered. The windshield fogged again. This time, something new scrolled on the glass. Toll taken. I wiped it away with my sleeve, heart pounding. The road ahead was still there. So was the booth. But now the toll man was outside. He stood to the left of the booth, motionless, arms at his sides. His cap was pulled low, shadowing his face. I couldn't see much, just a glimpse of skin, burned and twisted, peeking from beneath the brim. I drove around him slowly, keeping one eye on the figure. For a while, nothing happened. The road unrolled endlessly, mile markers glitching again. I saw the same broken guardrail 3 separate times. I passed a single shoe lying in the road, a children's shoe. Later, a dented tricycle with one wheel slowly spinning. And then the temperature dropped. I could see my breath in the cab. The truck began to rattle, like something was crawling on the roof. There were 3 knocks. I hit the brakes and stepped out, scanning the roof with a flashlight. Nothing.
I circled the truck. Empty road, trees silent. Even the engine ticked softly as it cooled. A low breeze cut through the trees and carried with it something I couldn't place. When I climbed back in, the tray was back. And this time something else was missing. My pinky nail. Gone. No blood, no pain, just gone. Like it was never there. I stared at my hand, heart racing. "What do you want?" I said. The cab light flickered. The radio hissed to life for a split second, and a voice came through. "Pay." I started driving again, faster now, headlights slicing through the trees. Every turn looked the same. The steering wheel trembled under my hands. I passed a road sign that read, "Debt must be settled," in standard highway font. And then it was gone when I looked back. Something whispered my name, not through the radio, not in my head. From the back seat. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just kept driving. Suddenly, a new light appeared ahead. Not the booth. A cabin. Small, one-story, porch light flickering. I slammed the brakes and coasted to a stop. I ran up and knocked. "Hello? Please, something's wrong. I need help." The door creaked open. Inside stood a woman in her 70s, wrapped in a shawl, eyes wide. "You didn't pay, did you?" "You know about this." She nodded. "He comes for those who take without giving." "What does he want?" I asked. Her gaze dropped to my hand. "Something you value, and if you don't offer it, he'll take what he likes." I looked around the cabin. Sparse, dusty. The air smelled like cedar and mildew. A fireplace full of ash. A rocking chair worn down to splinters. She pointed to the mantel, and a photo sat there. Her, decades younger, beside a man in a toll booth uniform. "That's him," I said. She nodded. "My husband. He worked that booth for 40 years. Wasn't a bad man, just too proud. Wouldn't let an ambulance through one winter storm. The boy inside, well, the poor boy died. And someone lit the booth on fire with my husband inside. Now he thinks it's still his job, and he still collects. What do I do?" She handed me something small, a token, rusted, round, but it had weight. I turned it over in my fingers. It wasn't just stamped metal. The surface shimmered faintly, like something burned just beneath it. On one side it read, "One pass, no return." The other side bore an unfamiliar emblem. What looked like a road twisting into an eye. "You could probably sell this to a collector," I muttered, half joking. "It looks antique." "You could," she said, "but it wouldn't be yours anymore." That stuck with me more than it should have. As I stepped out, I turned back, and the cabin was gone. There were only trees. And ahead, the booth again, brighter than ever. The toll man stood in the center of the road, waiting. And this time I had something to give. I stood there, halfway between the truck and the booth, the token clutched in my hand. The rust had flaked off on my palm. The words, "One pass, no return," felt heavier. The tall man didn't move, but something held me back, something in the way he stared, like he was waiting to see if I'd try to cheat him. I looked at the token again. I turned it over in my fingers. What was it worth, really? A chunk of corroded metal? No, it was more than that. It had a strange shimmer in the light. The emblem on the back, a coiled road forming a single eye. It was designed. I'd seen antique dealers pay hundreds for less. I could pawn this, pay off half my debt in one sale, get ahead for once. But it wasn't mine, not truly. The old woman had handed it over like it cost her something. She'd said it plain. What I gave had to be mine, not borrowed. What was mine? Debt, sure. Regret, anger, memories I don't want anymore. But those weren't tangible. I hesitated, and then I pocketed the token. I reached into the glove box and pulled out a handful of coins, quarters, dimes, tokens from truck stops and old vending machines. I dropped them into the tray. They sat there. The tray didn't retract. Instead, it began to shake. Slow at first, then faster. The coins rattled like teeth. The windshield fogged instantly. Words carved into the condensation. No cheating. And then the headlights shut off, and the engine died. I tried the ignition. Nothing. The truck was dead. And then the dashboard screen flickered to life. Not GPS, not radio. Just a single word pulsing in yellow text. Pay. The screen buzzed with static, and for a second, the smell of scorched hair filled the cab. I gripped the wheel tighter. Whatever this thing was, it didn't want excuses, it wanted payment. The tray slammed shut, and when it extended again, something else was inside. My wedding ring. I hadn't worn it in years. My ex-wife gave it to me in a padded envelope after the divorce. I kept it buried in a sock drawer. But there it was, sitting in the tray like it'd been waiting its turn. The tall man's head tilted slightly, like he was listening. I didn't remember putting the ring in the truck, but it didn't matter. I took it. I held it in my palm. I remembered what she'd said that night before she left. You always take the easy road. And now here I was again, staring down a toll I didn't want to pay. All those years I avoided the hard choices, left things unresolved, let people go because it was easier than changing. Cheating the toll, it felt like second nature to me. But there was no bluffing here. I closed my eyes and slid the ring back in the tray. It disappeared. The tray retracted. The lights above the booth flared, then dimmed. But the tall man didn't move. The dashboard lit up again. A new word. Almost. A low sound vibrated through the cab. Not an engine, not wind. A groan, like a door opening beneath the earth. And then the booth's arm rose slowly, creaking like a coffin lid. I didn't wait. I drove through. Behind me, the light from the booth flickered once, then vanished. I checked the rearview mirror, half expecting to see that burned figure. But there was nothing. And yet the sense of him hadn't left. It clung to me. One word blinked over and over. Almost. I drove because it was the only thing I knew to do. Because stopping felt worse. I followed the endless road as it twisted through the night, past trees that grew sparse and brittle. The GPS was still frozen. The clock on the dash flashed gibberish. Around me, the scenery began to change. Stone walls and collapsed fencing lined the roadside. Old mile markers, broken and toppled. I passed rusted signs eaten away by time. And then just ahead, a glow. It wasn't the booth, it was something else. A barn, slumped and weathered. I stepped out, every nerve stretched tight, and the barn door creaked open. My flashlight cut through the dark and revealed rows of forgotten toll equipment. Metal signs, broken lights, old coin trays, all scattered and rusted, like the ghosts of a highway long gone. At the far end, something waited. A second booth. It looked older than anything I'd seen that night. No windows, no roof light. Just wood and metal warped by time. It felt less like a structure and more like something that had grown there. As I stepped closer, the tray slid out with a sound that didn't match its age. It didn't creak or squeal. It scraped, like it'd done this forever. I reached for the token. I held it in my hand for a long time. It looked different now. Darker, warped around the edges. I set it in the tray. Nothing happened. I added my wallet, my keys, my father's lighter. Still nothing. I looked down at the last thing I had, my watch. It was running again, ticking steady. I remember the last time it ticked like this. Hospital room. My dad was asleep beside me. I never wore it again after that day. I took it off. As I placed it in the tray, a cold breath passed through the booth. The tray didn't react. It sank. And then it was gone. No sound, no shift. Just absence. I stood there, waiting for something to happen. But there was no voice, no message, just the barn doors creaking open behind me, and the sound of crickets waiting outside. The road was open again. So I drove. The tires hummed on the road, like a lullaby I hadn't heard in years. I didn't touch the radio. The silence, well, it was finally just silence. Just empty air. The road ahead was unspooled like a ribbon. I followed its curves, waiting for the next horror to rise from the shadows. But the shadows held still. The trees thinned and gave way to fences. Street signs began to look familiar. Not twisted or corrupted, but normal. Real. One of them even read Carson City, 18 miles. I almost cried when I saw it. My phone buzzed in the cup holder, lighting up with a signal for the first time in hours. Back on the road, the world felt sharper. And then just before the city limits, I saw it. The booth. But it wasn't on the road. It was off to the side, in a field, half sunk in the dirt, like a relic. Cracked glass, sagging roof. And beside it, a wooden post with the faded sign, "Thank you for visiting the ridge." It was dead. Just a husk. Vines had begun to grow around the corners. Grass pushed up through the floor. The tray was rusted in place, unmoving. A scrap of fabric lay inside, charred, maybe part of his uniform, still faintly smoking. I drove past it without slowing down, and I made the delivery just after 1:30 a.m. The warehouse foreman barely looked at me. He signed the form with a tired grunt, then vanished into the building.
I didn't care. I got back in the truck and just sat there, fingers still wrapped tight around the wheel. The dashboard was quiet, and the tray was gone, like it'd never been there. I stared at my hands. The pinky nail was still missing. I went home the next morning, slept a full day. When I woke up, I called the guy I owed and told him I'd have his money within the week. Then I picked up 2 extra routes, both far from the mountains. I didn't care where they sent me, as long as the roads were well lit and the names were ones I knew. I stopped playing cards, canceled the online bets, gave away the poker set I'd kept under my bed. I never saw the old man at the gas station again. The place was boarded up when I passed a week later. Dust on the pump. It looked like it'd been closed for years. Sometimes when I drive and the night is just a little too quiet, I glance at the rear view, and every now and then, just for a second, I think I see someone standing there. But it never lasts. I don't look back, and I never take shortcuts anymore.